From a woman's body, slack in a blood-filled bathtub, to a baby wailing on the tile beside her, we open on stillness that feels like a scream. Rita's eyes are vacant. Dexter's hands are shaking as he cradles her, crimson water lapping at his sleeves. This was supposed to be the safe, suburban life, the reward for following the code. Instead, it's the crime scene his plan created. Cut, the sound drops out. Dokes hurls himself against the bars of that cage in the Everglades, veins bulging, voice raw. We don't hear the words yet, only see the fury. The righteous cop, trapped because Dexter's careful double life collapsed into a panicked kidnapping. The camera lingers on the gasoline cans, the plastic, the improvised prison that was never in the original plan. Over it, we hear Dexter's calm narration from another season, measured, clinical, almost soothing. He talks about control, about ritual, about the Dark Passenger being channeled by Harry's code. His voice is steady while the visuals are chaos. That contrast is the point. The central question is already forming in our heads if Dexter is this precise. Why does everything around him look like a disaster zone? Smashed to debris in the shipping container, gun aimed, arms trembling. Lagerta on her knees beside Dexter's kill setup, realization hardening in her eyes. Deb's breathing is ragged, mascara streaked, morality breaking in real time. Dexter steps in, trying to steer, to negotiate, to keep his plan intact. We cut before the shots. We don't need the sound to feel the collapse. LaGuerta's body on the dock now, sheet half pulled, blue lights strobing over stunned faces. Another investigation Dexter thought he could manipulate. Another woman who got too close to the truth and paid for the Dark Passenger's victory. To keep this clear, the focus is not just on bodies. It's on the widening blast radius of each decision he makes when the voice inside him takes the wheel. Quick hits, faster now. Plastic-wrapped rooms. Evidence burned in oil drums. Blood slides shattering on a floor. A doll's head left in a crime scene. Each time, Dexter's narration insists this is necessary. Controlled, according to plan. The image cuts to the moment that plan explodes. A body discovered too early. A survivor stumbling out. A loved one walking into frame at the worst possible second. Then silence again. Harrison stands alone in the aftermath of the storm. Snow and ash drifting together. No father in sight. Years later, lumberjack Dexter stares out at an endless wall of trees. Face blank. Life erased. No kill room. No family. No Miami sun. Just isolation as the final solution to a life he swore he could manage. In this video, we're going to rewind from that frozen exile back to the humid, confident days of early Miami, when Dexter believed the code, the job, and the ritual gave him absolute control. Each major section will track a different phase of that illusion, and along the way, we'll map a hidden trajectory every single time the Dark Passenger quietly overruled the plan and drove Dexter Morgan's world straight off a cliff. Because on paper, Dexter's life should work. Stalk the target, confirm the victims, prepare the kill room, leave no evidence. From that plastic-wrapped ritual to the blood slides tucked neatly in an air conditioner. The show sells us an image of absolute control, the perfect plan, repeated night after night, under the comforting illusion that Harry's code keeps everything contained. But when we actually track what happens, season by season, Dexter's world is less a well-oiled system and more a graveyard of failed plans and shattered safeguards. Every time he thinks the investigation is under control, a body resurfaces. Every time he believes a relationship is protected, it becomes a liability. Every time he swears the Dark Passenger is leashed, it drags him somewhere he never intended to go. So here's the pivot. The central question is not, how does Dexter manage to live by the code? It's how many times does the code lose? When we rewatch the series through that lens, Dexter's story stops being a tale of a monster controlled by rules and becomes a catalog of moments where those rules are overrun, outvoted, or outright mocked by the thing inside him that just wants to kill. In this video, we're going to treat Harry's Code and the Dark Passenger as two competing blueprints for Dexter's life. One claims to be rational, procedural, almost ethical. The other is impulsive, hungry, and indifferent to consequences. To keep this clear, the focus is not just on who ends up on Dexter's table, but on every major plan he builds to protect his double life, his family, and his sense of self, and how those plans implode. Dokes' death is not an accident of plot. It's the Dark Passenger cashing in on Dexter's choice to stalk, frame, and corner a man who was right about him. Rita's murder is not just Trinity being one step ahead. It's the long-delayed bill for Dexter's obsession, his refusal to walk away when the code said this is too risky. Deb's discovery in that church isn't a random twist. It's the inevitable moment when years of lies buckle under the weight of one more body on the floor. And LaGuerta's execution, that is the code's public collapse. Dexter doesn't kill her because she's a monster who slipped through the cracks. He kills her because she's right, because Deb is trapped, and because the Dark Passenger would rather burn the safety net than accept exposure. Each major section will move through a different phase of this trajectory, from early Miami to Iron Lake, mapping how every failed scheme leaves Dexter more isolated and more defined by the very urges he claims to control. Along the way, we'll reframe those iconic shocks not as isolated twists, but as a pattern of Dark Passenger victories that once seen, you can't unsee. So let's kick things off by going back to where the illusion was strongest. Season 1, the Bay Harbor butcher in waiting, and a brother who understands Dexter's real nature better than Harry ever did. Before we walk through Season 1, we need to fix our lens. We're not just replaying a highlight reel of bodies on plastic. We're treating every major arc as an investigation into planning itself, what Dexter intends, how he thinks he's maintaining control, and the precise instant the Dark Passenger elbows him off his own script. To keep this clear, each major section will frame an arc like a case file. What was the plan? What safeguards did Dexter trust? And where did that inner voice stop being a tool he wields and become the thing that's actually driving? From Brian inviting him back into the shipping container, to Miguel Prado standing in a kill room Dexter didn't mean to share, to that church with Travis Marshall when Deb walks in at the worst possible second. These aren't random shocks. They are the moments where the code loses the argument. 3 recurring dynamics will anchor how we read those collapses. First, Dexter's overconfidence in his own intellect, the belief that a meticulous ritual, a clean table, and a good cover story equal invincibility. Second, his hunger for genuine connection, the way he keeps convincing himself he can have a brother, a partner, a family, without the Dark Passenger contaminating everything. Third, his blindness to other people's intelligence and agency, the assumption that Deb, Dokes, LaGuerta, Trinity, even Harrison will stay in the roles he's assigned them. When we ask the central question, who's really in control here? Those 3 forces will be our baseline. The focus is not just on operational failures. Yes, we'll track the obvious breakdowns, botched kills, trophies discovered, patterns that turn into the Bay Harbor Butcher investigation, the night Leela turns Dexter's careful Dokes containment into a literal explosion. But alongside that, we'll map the relational and existential failures, Deb's trust corroding scene by scene, Rita's death as the bill for a season of lies. Anna and Harrison as test cases in whether Dexter can ever build a life that isn't secretly engineered around murder. That means some fan-favorite villains and stylish kills will stay in the background. If a confrontation doesn't show the Dark Passenger overriding the code and wrecking a larger plan, we're not going to linger on it. A clean execution that fits Harry's rules is less important to this trajectory than, say, framing Dokes, killing LaGuerta, or letting Trinity live long enough to reach the bathtub. In this video, we're going to prioritize the moments where the psychology of the Dark Passenger bends the entire story off course. And along the way, we'll keep circling back to consequences. How does choosing Brian over Deb for one night in Season 1 echo into Deb's breakdown in later seasons? How does letting Trinity walk out of that first encounter pave the road to Iron Lake? The pattern we're tracing is long. One Dark Passenger victory early on doesn't stay contained, it ripples forward, warping every new plan Dexter thinks he's making. So with that framework in place, let's step into the first real stress test of Harry's code, Brian Moser, the Bay Harbor butcher in waiting, and a season where Dexter's perfect system meets someone who knows his origin story better than he does. Brian is the first stress test, but he's not the last. To keep this clear, we need a roadmap for how we're going to track the Dark Passenger winning, over and over, from that first refrigerated crime scene all the way to the snow in Iron Lake. Chronologically, we'll move season by season, following Dexter's trajectory from the pilot through New Blood. Each major section will lock on to a single plan Dexter thinks he can control. Then, follow it through the investigation, the improvisations, and the collapse. Early Miami Metro, Married with Kids Suburbia, Post, Rita Guilt, Deb's Unraveling, Exile in Oregon, the fake fresh start in Iron Lake. Each era escalates how loudly the Dark Passenger speaks, and how completely it drowns out everything else. Inside that spine, we're going to sort every major failure into 3 categories. First, operational failures, the moments where the logistics fall apart. The wrong tale, the wrong alibi, the evidence he forgets he's leaving behind. Second, relational failures, plans that corrupt, weaponize, or destroy a relationship. These are the kills and cover-ups that turn confidants into collateral damage. Third, existential failures, when a plan doesn't just go wrong, it detonates Dexter's entire life structure, his job, his family, his identity as a monster who only hurts monsters. In this video, we're going to keep returning to that triad. Take Dokes. On paper, he starts as an operational problem, a cop whose instincts slice through Dexter's camouflage. The blood slides in his hands, the stalking, the near misses around the Bay Harbor butcher investigation. This is Dexter's system, breaking in real time. But the Dark Passenger's solution, Leela's explosion at the cabin, instantly turns that operational failure into a relational one. A colleague, a rival, a man Deb respects, is erased to preserve Dexter's secret. The cost is no longer just risk. It's trust. Rita's death pushes the framework even further. Dexter's plan with Trinity is meticulous. Infiltrate, learn, control the pattern, then kill. Operationally, he fails to see the obvious openings. Relationally, he abandons Rita's needs for his obsession. And existentially, that bathtub scene is the Dark Passenger's victory lap. The fantasy of the safe family man collapses, and there is no version of Dexter Morgan who walks away from that as the same person. And then there's Deb. Her final arc is where all 3 categories collide. Operationally, she's dragged into cover-ups she cannot manage. Relationally, her love for Dexter is twisted into a chain around her neck. Existentially, her brain-dead body in that hospital is the bill for every time Dexter chose the Dark Passenger over the people begging him to stop. The focus is not just on big twists, though. Our inclusion rule is simple. We're only counting plans where, once the Dark Passenger wins, the old status quo is gone forever. No minor close calls, no one-episode detours. These are the breaks in the timeline. And along the way, we'll see that even in Season 1, when Dexter seems most in control, the Dark Passenger is already quietly racking up wins that will cost him everything later. So let's kick things off where Dexter's illusion feels strongest. Season 1. Miami at golden hour. Blood spatter framed like art. And a killer who genuinely believes he has everything under control. He has a job that feeds his Dark Passenger, a boat that swallows the evidence, and above it all, Harry's code as a neat, laminated rulebook. In Dexter's mind, he's not spiraling. He's a functioning monster with a maintenance plan. To keep this clear, Dexter doesn't see the Dark Passenger as a co-pilot yet. It's a caged animal he lets out on a schedule. Stalk the target, confirm the victims, prepare the kill room, leave no evidence. Harry's voice tells him where the lines are, and Dexter's psychology fills in the rest with comforting narratives about deserving and need. He thinks the investigation will never reach him, because he is the investigation. That's the fantasy. Then, the ice truck killer shows up, and quietly rewrites the terms. We get bloodless bodies, doll-like poses, and crime scenes tailored specifically to Dexter's gaze. This isn't just a rival. This is courtship. The Dark Passenger is suddenly being flirted with. Harry never wrote a chapter on what to do when someone understands your darkness, anticipates your moves, and leaves little presents in your freezer. From that moment, control starts slipping. Dexter lingers at crime scenes longer than he should, not as a careful analyst, but as an admirer. He toys with the Barbie doll hand in his fridge. He takes trophies beyond the blood slides, savoring the game. That's not the code. That's impulse. How many times does he return to ice truck setups he doesn't need to revisit, just to feel seen? In this video, we're going to keep coming back to that gap between what Dexter thinks he's doing and what the Dark Passenger is actually steering. Season 1 is the prototype, the first real crack. The focus is not just on who he kills, but on how he starts bending Harry's rules the second someone offers him recognition instead of restraint. The Dark Passenger doesn't just want a plastic-wrapped ritual anymore. It wants intimacy, applause, and eventually, freedom from the code itself. That's why his fixation on Rudy, later revealed as Brian, hits so hard. Dexter tells himself this is an investigation, a puzzle he needs to solve. But emotionally, he's chasing the one person who mirrors his trauma, his urges, his potential future, without Harry's constraints. Is he hunting Brian, or is he auditioning for the life Brian is offering? And caught in the middle is Deb. Dexter mismanages her from the start, using her as bait while pretending he's protecting her, downplaying his suspicions about Rudy, keeping her emotionally close, but informationally starved. That double role, sister and lure, isn't a strategic plan. It's the Dark Passenger prioritizing its obsession over her safety. Each major section will show bigger collapses, but Season 1 gives us the blueprint: obsession with Brian, betrayal of Deb, and a code already fraying. The real question is, once Dexter chooses between brother and sister, does he actually win anything, or does the Dark Passenger win either way? So when Dexter finally walks into that refrigerated kill room with Brian, it feels like resolution. The ice truck killer investigation has peaked, the pattern is revealed, and, on paper, Dexter's plan held. Identify the rival predator. Track him. Confirm his victims. Then, once the evidence is airtight and the code is satisfied, eliminate the threat and go back to the carefully compartmentalized life he thinks he controls. That was the original design. Harry's code as blueprint, Dexter as disciplined architect. Keep the Dark Passenger on a leash by giving it structure, stalk at night. Analyze blood by day, protect Deb, protect the job, protect the cover. In this video, we're going to treat that Season 1 plan as the baseline, a fantasy of perfect control before family and memory shatter it. Because the second Dexter realizes the ice truck killer is Brian Moser, his brother, the entire internal hierarchy flips. Harry's code stops being the loudest voice. The Dark Passenger smells blood and kinship at the same time. It is not just hungry for killing anymore, it is hungry for connection. To keep this clear, the central question in these episodes is not, will Dexter catch Brian? It's which voice inside Dexter gets to define what catch even means. We watch him delay. He rationalizes. Brian keeps violating the code in glaring ways, targeting innocent women, staging corpses as messages, escalating the body count, and Dexter keeps finding reasons not to act. He tells himself he needs more proof, more time, a better opportunity. But that investigation stalling isn't caution, it's collusion. The Dark Passenger wants to see what a life without Harry's rules might look like. The clearest victories happen in the quiet, intimate scenes. Dexter on the rooftop with Brian, basking in the thrill of finally being seen. Dexter standing in that blood-drenched hotel room, not horrified, but entranced by the artistry. He indulges the feeling of being understood, of not having to fake a smile or a moral compass. Those are moments where the Dark Passenger wins outright. He lets a serial killer walk away again and again because the emotional high outweighs the code, and the consequences land on Deb. Brian kidnaps her, straps her to a table, and forces Dexter into an engineered collapse of his entire plan. Brother or sister? Dark Passenger or Harry's code? There is no clever workaround, no forensic trick, no escape hatch. Dexter's need for connection has put Deb exactly where the code was supposed to prevent her from ever being, helpless on a kill table, about to die because of him. Yes, Dexter kills Brian, but it's not a clean victory, it's a damage control execution after the Dark Passenger has already hijacked his priorities. The fantasy of control is broken. Brian proved that if the right emotional pressure is applied, family, recognition, belonging, Dexter will risk everything Harry built. And that trajectory doesn't end here. Along the way, every future plan will carry this imprint. If a brother can override the code, what happens when it's a friend, a partner, or a child? And if a brother can override the code, what happens when the Dark Passenger realizes it can use Dexter Morgan the same way? Season 1 quietly answers that for us, and it does it by turning Dexter's brightest relationship into his first real sacrificial calculation. On paper, Dexter has a very clear plan for Deb. She is never supposed to be part of the investigation, never part of the game, never anywhere near the plastic. In his internal mythology, she's the proof that he can pass as normal, the foul-mouthed, hard-working cop who believes in the system while he operates outside it. To keep this clear, Deb exists to balance him. She's the daylight that lets him walk in the dark without going blind. But then, Brian appears, and that balance collapses. Dexter's obsession with the ice truck killer is framed as an intellectual chase, a professional puzzle, yet we watch it become something much more personal and primal. He misses obvious red flags in Deb's whirlwind romance with Rudy, the love bombing, the too perfect interest in her brother, the way Rudy's crime scenes speak directly to Dexter's psychology. Any other case, any other suspect, Dexter would dissect the pattern. Here, he looks away. Why? Because the central question for him is no longer, is Deb safe? It's, who is this person who understands me? This is the Dark Passenger's first major relational victory. It doesn't need to grab the wheel violently. It just has to nudge Dexter's priorities a few inches off center until Deb becomes a data point instead of a person. Along the way, every choice he makes in that season's trajectory reinforces that shift. He lets her stay with Rudy. He rationalizes her happiness as a reason not to dig deeper. He tells himself he's in control while walking her straight into a predator's arms. Then we hit the basement. Deb hanging from a hook, drugged, wrapped in plastic like one of Dexter's own trophies. Brian's kill room is a mirror, and Dexter is forced to look into it. His two worlds collide in a single image. The sister he swore to protect displayed exactly how he displays his victims. This is not just a rescue scene. It's a demonstration that the Dark Passenger has maneuvered his sister onto his own kind of table, using his hunger for connection as the leverage. She survives. The plan, on the surface, is salvaged. But the damage is structural. Deb wakes up with no memory, while Dexter walks away knowing that his secrecy, his fixation, his need to feel understood almost got her carved up. That knowledge is the seed. From here on, every argument, every lie, every compromised investigation between them is watered by this unspoken truth. His darkness will always endanger her. And crucially, Season 1 doesn't end with a clean reset. The fantasy of control is already cracked. The Dark Passenger has learned something terrifyingly useful. If understanding is on the table, Dexter will risk the person he loves most. So what happens when future lovers, partners, or even Deb herself stand between that voice and what it wants next? Season 2 answers that question with a literal nightmare. The past doesn't just haunt Dexter, it floats. We open on divers surfacing in Biscayne Bay, black trash bags bobbing like a crime scene calendar. What used to be Dexter's perfect solution, weigh the body, sink the evidence, forget the name, suddenly becomes a grotesque archive. Every neatly wrapped parcel is a broken promise of control. The investigation doesn't start with a single mistake. It starts with all of them, rising at once. To keep this clear, that bay is the Dark Passenger's scrapbook. Years of successful kills, all the rituals Harry's code told him would keep him safe, are reclassified in an instant as a mass grave. The blood slides in his air conditioner, the currents he thought would scatter his victims. The confidence that no one would ever connect the dots. Season 2 shreds that illusion. Miami Metro isn't chasing a theory anymore. They're standing on Dexter's dumping ground. And this is where the pressure changes shape. In Season 1, Dexter is dodging suspicion in a general sense, hiding in plain sight. Now, there is an active manhunt for his alter ego, with a task force room, and a name that feels like a taunt: the Bay Harbor Butcher. The central question is no longer, can he blend in? It's, can he live and work inside the very investigation designed to catch him? His colleagues pin photos to the board. Lundy builds a profile. Deb brings coffee to meetings about the monster her brother actually is. Standing in the middle of that is Dokes. Not as a quirky antagonist, but as the human embodiment of consequence. He doesn't buy the harmless lab geek act, and crucially, his instincts aren't noise. They're accurate, disciplined, relentless. Dexter's plan has always relied on people seeing what they expect. Dokes refuses. He tails Dexter. He confronts him at crime scenes. He watches him dump blood slides. Every time Dexter underestimates his intelligence, the Dark Passenger feels the walls close in a little more. Meanwhile, Dexter is trying something new: abstinence. After Rita calls out his drug problem and forces a 12-step narrative onto his killings, he attempts a detox. No stalking, no kill rooms, no release. On paper, it's a moral pivot toward family. In practice, it's psychological withdrawal. The dark passenger doesn't fade, it thrashes. We watch him sweat through meetings, fixate on potential targets, and rationalize just one more, as if murder were a relapse instead of the baseline. So his solution is another plan for control: frame a convenient monster, dump suspicion onto someone else, and walk away clean. Each major section will show this pattern, but Season 2 is the template. The frame-up spirals into a cage in a cabin, an explosion by the Everglades, and an innocent man, James Dokes, dying as the world applauds Dexter's alter ego's capture. The dark passenger wins not by keeping him hidden, but by teaching him a darker lesson. If the right scapegoat burns, he can survive anything. That belief will drive the next, even bloodier, phase of his trajectory. So let's kick things off by rewinding to Dexter's original plan for James Dokes, because on paper, it's almost modest. Don't kill him. Don't touch him. Just misdirect, outsmart, and wait for the investigation to move on. Dokes isn't a predator. He's a cop, whose only real crime is seeing Dexter clearly. In Dexter's fantasy of control, that should make this simple: frame someone else, fake a trail, and keep his hands clean. From tailing Dokes at the gym to planting the blood slides in his car, Dexter treats him like another puzzle to solve, not a man whose life is about to be consumed. The central question, even here, is whether Harry's code can coexist with a living witness who won't back down. At first, Dexter insists it can. He draws a line: Dokes is innocent, therefore he is off the table. That's the rule. That's the story Dexter tells himself. But pressure changes the psychology of every plan. As the Bay Harbor Butcher investigation tightens, as Lundy's task force closes in, Dexter's options shrink. Surveillance gives way to confrontation. Confrontation gives way to panic. And then we arrive at the cabin. The moment he locks Dokes in that remote cage, we watch the code bend. No plastic wrap, no kill tools, but the structure is the same. Isolation, control, a human being reduced to a problem to be managed. To keep this clear, Dexter doesn't just imprison Dokes physically, he starts rehearsing the murder in his head. Each visit with food is also a visit with the dark passenger. One voice catalogs reasons not to kill. Dokes is innocent. Harry would disapprove. The line must hold. The other voice whispers the operational truth. Killing Dokes would end the risk, end the investigation, end the fear. Which voice sounds more practical? Which one sounds more like survival? We watch him rationalize in real time. He tells himself he's buying time. He tells himself he's looking for another scapegoat. But the longer Dokes stays in that cage, the more obvious it becomes that Dexter is waiting for permission, not a plan. And that's where Lila enters as the dark passenger's perfect proxy. She has no code, no history with Harry, no moral breaks. When she blows up the cabin and incinerates Dokes, she doesn't derail Dexter's trajectory. She completes the choice he was circling. In this video, we're going to keep returning to this pattern. Dexter doesn't swing the blade, but the consequences are indistinguishable from murder. An innocent man dies for Dexter's secret. The world celebrates the Bay Harbor Butcher's death. Dexter walks away with plausible deniability, but no moral escape. The code has been compromised, and he knows it. The focus is not just on the explosion, it's on what survives it. A new belief that if the dark passenger wants something badly enough, the universe will provide a Lila to do the dirty work. What happens when that belief collides with people he actually loves? So when the universe provides a Lila, Dexter doesn't just survive Dokes. He learns the worst possible lesson, that if he wraps the dark passenger in the language of recovery, people will applaud while it feeds. That's the real pivot of Season 2. Not the Bay Harbor Butcher investigation, but the moment Dexter realizes he can hide his compulsion in plain sight. Let's kick things off with the plan. On paper, Narcotics Anonymous is perfect. Dexter needs a public story for his erratic behavior, his disappearances, his emotional distance from Rita. So, he reframes his ritual as an addiction. The late nights become meetings. The secret urges become relapse triggers. Harry's code gets translated into the soft vocabulary of recovery, a metaphorical shield that keeps coworkers and family from looking too closely. To keep this clear, Dexter isn't trying to heal. He's building a socially acceptable mask. Enter Leela. And this is where the mask stops being a barrier and becomes an invitation. Unlike Rita, who responds to Dexter's oddness with boundaries and expectations, Leela leans directly into the darkness. She romanticizes his violence when he confesses about almost killing the man who rear-ended them. She calls his rage beautiful, treats his destructive impulses as evidence of depth instead of danger. The central question shifts from, how do I control this, to, what if someone actually loves this? In that gap, the Dark Passenger gets bolder. We watch Dexter let Leela become an emotional playground, the impulsive affair, the jealous theatrics. The fire she sets in her own apartment so he'll rescue her. He knows she's unstable. He knows this is chaos. But instead of cutting her off with the same cold precision he uses on a target, he indulges. He lets the passenger enjoy being seen, worshipped, validated. What happens to a code built on secrecy when the monster starts getting applause? The consequences arrive fast and brutal. Leela stalks Rita, poisons the tenuous family stability Dexter claims to value, and deliberately endangers Astor and Cody in that cabin accident. She escalates every boundary he fails to enforce. And then, the ultimate collateral damage, she murders Dokes. One of the only people who saw Dexter clearly dies, not because the code demanded it, but because Lila wants to protect her fantasy of him. Dexter's decision to keep her orbiting his life gives the Dark Passenger an outsourced hitman. Along the way, his trajectory quietly shifts. Using Lila as an alibi for his urges doesn't stay contained to Season 2. It becomes a template, a method. Later, Miguel will be the prot who turns the code into open season. Lumen will be the partner who lets him believe shared trauma justifies expanding the kill table. Hannah will be the lover who seems built for his darkness. Each major section of Dexter's life will repeat this same pattern, a relationship presented as cover, control, connection, that ends as another victory lap for the passenger. And the collapse only gets worse from here. If Leela was Dexter's lesson that chaos can wear the mask of salvation, Miguel Prado is the moment that mask walks into court in a tailored suit. Season 3 takes the fantasy one step further. What if the Dark Passenger didn't have to hide in the shadows at all, because a powerful district attorney was ready to bless its work? Let's kick things off with the surface image. Miguel, grieving brother, and crusading Da, raging against a system that lets killers walk. Dexter sees him screaming at a suspect, sees the same volcanic fury he feels, and the central question snaps into place. Is this finally someone who can understand him without flinching? Not a toxic savior like Leela, but a righteous ally with institutional power. In this video, we're going to treat Miguel as Dexter's first full-scale experiment in sharing the code. Dexter builds a plan that sounds almost reasonable in his own narration. Teach Miguel a sanitized version of Harry's rules, use Miguel's badge as legal camouflage, and in return, gain something he has never had before, a friend who knows the truth. To keep this clear, Dexter doesn't initially hand over the real code. He cherry-picks the parts that make him feel noble. Only kill killers. Be certain. Be controlled. But the dark passenger hears something very different in Miguel's voice. It doesn't hear grief, it hears appetite. Miguel's rage, his ambition, his resentment toward loopholes and rivals and inconvenient witnesses. All of that becomes raw material. Where Harry's code was supposed to be a break, Miguel treats it like a brand, a justification he can stamp onto anyone who crosses him. We watch the guardrails vanish almost immediately. Miguel pushes for targets Dexter would never touch under the code. Personal enemies, professional threats, people who humiliated him. What starts as a joint investigation into a truly dangerous predator slides into Miguel lobbying for side quests of revenge. The focus is not just on who ends up on the table, but on how quickly the criteria dissolve once Miguel realizes there are no real consequences. Dexter's overconfidence is the real accelerant. He believes he can manage Miguel like an apprentice, that his own experience and rituals will keep everything contained. He underestimates Miguel's autonomy, but he also underestimates his own hunger for connection. How many red flags does he ignore because it feels good to be seen? How many deviations from the code does he rationalize because, for once, he isn't alone in the kill room? By the time Dexter recognizes Miguel is out of control, the dark passenger has already cashed in. The body count is higher. The code is compromised. A sitting Da is now a serial killer with political reach and zero discipline. Operationally, Dexter has created a threat he can't easily disappear. Relationally, he has to betray the only friend who ever embraced his darkness. Existentially, the experiment answers its own question: share the code, and the passenger doesn't shrink. It scales. And this failed partnership doesn't just end with Miguel's death. It sets the trajectory for something even worse. A killer who will destroy Dexter's family, not by sharing the code, but by slipping right past it. Miguel is where that scaling becomes explicit. Up to this point, the code is Harry's attempt at control, the dark passenger is the raw urge. And Dexter is the middle manager trying to keep the peace. With Miguel, he promotes himself. He decides he can be Harry. Let's kick things off with Dexter's own justification. In his mind, teaching Miguel the code isn't a risk, it's an upgrade. Harry took one damaged boy and turned a potential mass murderer into a precision instrument. So Dexter tells himself this is legacy work. If he can replicate that process, if he can turn another killer into a tool for good, then maybe his curse was always meant to be a design, not a defect. The central question for him is no longer should I kill, but can I teach killing responsibly? On paper, the plan is meticulous. Start with a sanctioned target. Walk Miguel through the investigation. Confirm the victims, build the ritual, lay down the plastic. To keep this clear, Dexter frames the first lesson kill as a lab experiment. Same procedure, new assistant. But the second Miguel steps into that room, the psychology shifts. Dexter isn't alone. He's seen. He's admired. The thrill of having someone watch him work, mirror his movements, echo his justifications, hits harder than any scalpel of self-doubt. So when Miguel takes shortcuts, we watch Dexter's perception bend in real time. Miguel pushes for faster confirmation, looser standards, more emotion. Objectively, these are red flags. Subjectively, they feel like chemistry. Miguel's enthusiasm becomes loyalty. His improvisations feel like initiative. His personal vendettas, Dexter reads them as righteous passion. The dark passenger quietly reframes every warning sign as a bonding moment. This isn't a violation of the code. This is what partnership looks like, right? Along the way, we can track the point of no return to one name: Ellen Wolf. A defense attorney, a thorn in Miguel's side, and absolutely not vetted under Harry's rules. When Miguel murders her on his own, off script and off code, it's not a random escalation. It's the logical consequence of Dexter's need for this relationship to work. He saw Miguel's rage. He heard the fantasies. He felt the line blurring and chose not to slam the brakes, because that would mean admitting the experiment was a failure. Operationally, Ellen Wolf is a catastrophic breach. Relationally, it's the moment student outruns teacher. Existentially, it exposes the truth. By trying to become Harry, Dexter became the Dark Passenger's recruiter. He didn't just fail to contain his own urges, he franchised them. If he can twist Harry's code this easily in someone else's hands, how much can he trust it in his own? And once the code proves corruptible here, the trajectory is set for an even more devastating collapse. A killer who won't need Dexter's mentorship at all to annihilate his family. Miguel is where that trajectory stops being theoretical. It's no longer about a corruptible code in someone else's hands. It's about what Dexter does when the monster he trained won't stay on the leash. Once Miguel goes rogue, Dexter's plan is brutally simple. Damage control through deletion. Quietly eliminate Miguel, erase the apprenticeship, and then slide back into the picture-perfect life with Rita, the kids, and a baby on the way. In his head, it's a clean sequence. One last kill, one flawless staging, and then permanent recommitment to family. Stalk the target. Prepare the rooftop. Reset the life. To keep this clear, Dexter is treating homicide like hitting an emotional reset button. But the rooftop confrontation exposes how far they've already crossed a line. We watch Dexter waiting in the dark, plastic ready, face tight, with something more volatile than professional focus. When Miguel arrives, this isn't the detached Bay Harbor butcher applying Harry's code. It's a man seething with anger, betrayal, and wounded pride. Miguel mocks the code, throws Dexter's own hypocrisy back at him, and for a second we see the Dark Passenger flinch at being read so accurately. The knife that finally goes in is not just a tool of justice. It's a breakup, an execution, and a self-indictment, all at once. In this video, we're going to keep returning to that pattern. Dexter tells himself a kill will restore control, but the central question is always, control of what? On that rooftop, he's not restoring order to Miami. He's trying to restore order inside his own narrative, to prove he can still decide who lives inside his secret and who gets cut out of it permanently. And the plan fails immediately. Miguel's death doesn't close a chapter. It detonates one. His brother Ramon spirals into violence, lashing out, pulling guns, dragging the investigation into volatile territory. The Skinner remains at large. An active predator, Dexter, has not neutralized, who will soon intersect with Miguel's disappearance in ways Dexter never anticipated. Each major section will show this same rhythm. One necessary kill spawning two new threats, one cover-up creating a wider field of collapse. The relational cost is even worse. Miguel was Dexter's experiment in being known, in testing whether the Dark Passenger could have a friend. That experiment ends on a blood-stained rooftop, and the lesson Dexter takes is not, don't kill people. It's never let anyone this close again. The focus is not just on the body Miguel leaves behind, but on the psychological vacuum he creates. From here on, secrecy isn't just a precaution, it's Dexter's only stable relationship. The Dark Passenger becomes his most consistent companion, the one presence that will never betray him, because it is him. And once that logic takes hold, kill the person who knows too much, retreat deeper into isolation, we can feel where the trajectory is heading. If this is what happens when a friend pierces the facade, what happens when it's family? Or someone who refuses to stay dead in his conscience? So when we ask what happens when it's family, Season 4 is the answer that never stops echoing. This is where the Dark Passenger doesn't just win a skirmish or a cover-up. It wins the entire war at home. Let's kick things off with Arthur Mitchell walking into Dexter's life like a prophecy. A polite, church-going contractor, a husband, a father, a man who has been killing for 3 decades and still tucks his kids into bed. From a distance, Trinity looks like the impossible dream, proof that you can have a house, a ritual, and a body count without the whole structure collapsing. In this video, we're going to treat Trinity as Dexter's most dangerous investigation, because that's exactly how Dexter frames it. He doesn't just want to stop Arthur, he wants to study him. The plan is simple in Dexter's mind: infiltrate, observe, and extract a blueprint for long-term survival. How do you balance a family calendar with stalking, a code with compulsion, TA meetings with plastic wrap? To keep this clear, Dexter's stated goal is control, learn how to kill for decades, and never get caught. But the focus is not just on the logistics. Psychologically, Trinity offers Dexter something Harry never did: validation that the Dark Passenger can coexist with a normal life indefinitely. That's the hook. That's the lie. And once that idea lands, the passenger takes the wheel. Dexter has multiple chances to end Arthur early. He tracks him. He has him on a table. He knows the cycle. Instead, he delays. He inserts himself into Arthur's orbit as Kyle Butler, plays mentee to a monster, and brings the suburban nightmare right up to his own front door. Every extra day Trinity is alive is a day Dexter chooses curiosity over safety. This is where the pattern interrupts what we think we know about Dexter's priorities. We've been told over and over that the code and his family are non-negotiable. Yet he lies to Rita, misses milestones, lets Arthur roam free, and even brings the kids to a Thanksgiving hosted by an active serial killer. The danger signs are not subtle. Cody bonding with Arthur, Rita's unease, the constant disappearances. Dexter sees all of it and still thinks he can thread the needle. Operationally, this is a complete plan failure. Relationally, it's worse. Rita keeps voicing that something is off, and Dexter keeps treating her intuition as background noise to his experiment. The central question becomes brutally simple. What matters more, the family he claims to love, or the fantasy of a perfected Dark Passenger he wants to master? By the time he finally kills Trinity, the answer is written in blood. Rita in the bathtub. Harrison on the floor, crying in a pool of red that mirrors Dexter's own origin. It is the ultimate Dark Passenger victory, because it proves that his dream of total control was always a delusion, and the consequences land on the one person who never even knew the code existed. And once that line is crossed, we have to ask, if the passenger can do this to Rita, what chance does Deb have when she finally sees the truth up close? If Rita's death is the Dark Passenger burning down Dexter's fantasy from the outside, living with Trinity is where he willingly walks into the fire. Before the bathtub, before the blood. There's a quieter catastrophe. Dexter deciding that the best way to neutralize a serial killer is to move in with him. As Kyle Butler, Dexter doesn't just stalk Arthur Mitchell. He infiltrates him. He sits at his dinner table, helps with home repairs, tags along on church projects. What should have been a clean, 3-step plan: identify, confirm, eliminate, mutates into a prolonged psychological experiment. The investigation stops being about protecting Miami and starts being about feeding a question. How does this man have a family and a ritual and a life? In this video, we're going to treat that choice as the inflection point of Season 4's trajectory, because it's where the Dark Passenger stops hiding behind the code and starts writing the script. Dexter has multiple clean shots at Arthur. The kill room is ready. The pattern is nailed down. There are moments in parking garages, in isolated houses, on road trips. where one syringe ends the threat. He walks away every time. Why? Because the central question for him isn't how do I stop Trinity? It's how is Trinity still functioning? To keep this clear, we can track the key scenes where prudence loses to fascination. When Arthur explodes at Jonah at the dinner table, we see the mask slip. The quiet deacon becomes a raging tyrant. When he terrorizes his daughter in the bathroom, we see the domestic rot Dexter refuses to read as a warning. These are not red flags to him. They are data points. Each outburst should tell Dexter, you cannot build a stable life around a secret like this without poisoning everyone near you. Instead, he treats it as a twisted case study in managing the Dark Passenger. The consequences stack fast. Arthur figures out Kyle Butler isn't real. He catches Dexter's real name at the bank. He tracks down the police station. He shows up at Miami Metro, stands in front of Dexter's literal workplace, and smiles. The plan has fully inverted. The hunter is now the one being profiled. Yet Dexter still hesitates, still chases one more insight, one more conversation, one more glimpse into how Arthur compartmentalizes murder and TA meetings. Along the way, the risks bleed directly into Dexter's supposed safe zone. Arthur threatens Rita and the kids. He slips Dexter's grasp in public places, vanishes from kill setups, forces frantic course corrections that never should have been necessary. Each escape isn't just operational failure, it's a psychological confession that Dexter values the thrill of proximity over the boring, necessary work of ending the threat. Each major section will show us versions of this same collapse, but here it's almost literal. Every delay is a Dark Passenger choice. It's the high of understanding a fellow killer outranking the low. Mundane task of actually protecting his own home. And if this is what happens when Dexter studies a monster, what happens when the next monster is looking back at him in the mirror, and Deb is the one standing closest? So when Dexter finally gets Arthur Mitchell on that table, it feels, for a second, like victory. Trinity plastic wrapped, the knife raised, Dexter delivering that quiet, satisfied monologue about ending the threat and going home to his family. In his mind, the plan worked. The investigation paid off. Control has been restored. But the central question is, restored for who? Because Dexter isn't racing home to tuck Harrison in. He's savoring the kill. He's taking a trophy for the Dark Passenger, not securing safety for his wife and kids. The whole season's trajectory has pushed him toward this moment where he believes he can do both. Study Trinity, feed the passenger, then clock back into the husband and father role like nothing happened. Then we cut. Empty house, phone ringing, the airport voicemail, and finally, that bathroom. Rita in the tub, throat cut, skin waxy and still. Water stained red. Harrison on the floor, wailing, sitting in a pool of his mother's blood. It's a perfect visual echo of Dexter's own origin story, almost shot for shot. A small child screaming in a blood ocean, a life ripped apart in an instant. From that single image, the series rips away Dexter's fantasy more brutally than any monologue ever could. To keep this clear, the focus is not just on Trinity as a villain who slipped away for one last kill. The focus is on the chain of Dark Passenger decisions that made this outcome inevitable. Dexter stalked Arthur out of curiosity. He infiltrated his family, studied his rituals, let him walk multiple times because the psychology of Trinity was more compelling than the boring work of actually stopping him. Every delay was another invitation for consequences. So yes, Trinity swings the razor, but the passenger sets the stage. This is not a random tragedy. It's the logical endpoint of a season where Dexter kept prioritizing the rush of understanding a fellow predator over the mundane reality of protecting his own home. He moved Rita, Harrison, and the kids like pieces on a board to accommodate his double life, convinced the code and his rules would hold. Instead, the code fails, the safeguards collapse, and his family pays the price. In that bathroom, Dexter's entire self-concept dies alongside Rita. The belief that he can be a husband and father while still feeding the passenger is obliterated in one unforgettable tableau. Husband, father, monster. For 4 seasons, he's insisted he can be all 3. This shot answers, he cannot. From a storytelling standpoint, Rita's death is the Dark Passenger's bloodiest trophy. It proves the danger isn't limited to strangers on a table or enemies in a shipping container. It annihilates the very life Dexter pretends he's killing to protect. And if this is what happens when another killer mirrors his origin, what happens when the mirror is held up by someone who loves him back and refuses to look away? Season 5 answers that question with a cruel twist. What happens when the mirror isn't another predator, but a victim who needs help? Enter Lumen, bloodied, caged, shaking on that plastic in the Barrel Girls camp. She is everything Dexter's Dark Passenger supposedly exists to avenge, and everything his family life with Rita claimed to protect. Let's kick things off with Dexter's new plan. In the wreckage of Rita's murder, he doesn't try to silence the Dark Passenger. He repurposes it. If he can channel his urges into hunting the men who tortured Lumen, maybe the killing becomes healing for her, for him, for the story he tells himself about control. The focus is not just on stopping another Trinity, it's on proving that the same compulsion that destroyed his wife can give someone else their life back. To keep this clear, Lumen is not Miguel. Miguel was already a prosecutor, circling the edge of the abyss, seduced by power and rage. Lumen is a civilian, a survivor whose psychology has been shattered, whose first kill is a panicked act of self-defense. She has no code, no taste for ritual. Yet Dexter still walks her through the knives, the plastic, the photos, the blood. He doesn't just protect her, he inducts her. This is where the lines of consent and morality blur. On the surface, she's asking for help. She wants justice, she wants the men who hurt her gone. But who designs the process? Who sets the rules, chooses the targets, controls the investigation? Dexter, the Dark Passenger. He wraps it in Harry's language, in talk of careful selection and evidence, but the structure is his kill room with a second chair added. Is that partnership, or is that recruitment? Operationally, the plan is a nightmare. Multiple conspirators with money and influence. Bodies piling up across Miami. Quinn sniffing around Dexter's connection to Liddy, a traumatized partner living in his secret apartment while he's also a single father, a blood analyst, and the Bay Harbor butcher in permanent hiding. Each major section will of this season feels like a logistics test the Dark Passenger keeps trying to fail. One missed tail, one wrong body dump, one neighbor seeing Lumen at the wrong time. And the entire fade collapses. And yet, emotionally, this is the closest Dexter comes to believing in redemption. He lets Lumen see him fully. No masks, no lies about bowling or late nights at the lab. For a brief moment, the central question of his life shifts. Not, can I hide what I am? But can what I am actually help someone? That's a dangerous kind of hope. Here's the pattern interrupt. It almost works. The men are dead. Lumen is safe. For one night, they imagine a future built on shared darkness. Then her trauma eases. The need to kill leaves her. She walks away. And that is the Dark Passenger's quiet victory. Even when Dexter bends it toward good, it still can't sustain a real connection. The moment Lumen heals, she has to leave the world that killing built. Dexter is left with a new proof. If someone truly recovers, they cannot stay with him. So where do you go after learning that your best version of yourself still drives people away? In the next season, Dexter tries a different experiment. What if instead of healing a victim, he can shape a killer from the ground up, starting with his own son? So when Dexter turns from his son to the Barrel Girl investigation, the trajectory feels almost inevitable. We go from wondering whether he can raise a child without the Dark Passenger to watching him weaponize someone else's trauma in the name of justice. Let's kick things off with the barrels themselves. Rows of rusted drums opened in a swamp, plastic sheeting peeled back, decomposed bodies stacked like discarded inventory. It's one of the few times the show forces us to sit with industrialized cruelty, not just a single victim, but a system. For Dexter, this isn't abstract horror. It echoes the shipping container, the smell of blood, his mother's body in pieces. The investigation doesn't just anger him. It reactivates his origin story and gives the Dark Passenger a deeply personal justification to rage. How do you restrain something that believes it's finally found its true enemy? Then, Lumen appears. A survivor, shaking on the floor, eyes wide with the knowledge that the men in her nightmares are still free. To keep this clear, Dexter faces a choice he rarely gets: follow the code alone, or give this victim real agency. He chooses her. He lets her into the plan. He walks her through stalking, abducting, and killing, as if the code can be taught like a skill. But in giving her that power, he loosens every safeguard he spent seasons building. No training, no emotional distance, no clean separation between witness, partner, and potential liability. The consequences show up almost immediately. Improvised kills in garages, botched tailing jobs, near exposures with Jordan Chase's security and the other rapists. Dexter scrambling to move bodies, to clean scenes he never had time to prepare. Compared to his earlier ritualized work, this season is operationally sloppy, rushed plastic, shared weapons, a partner whose fear spikes at the worst possible moments. Each major section will showcase another close call, another moment where the Dark Passenger lunges ahead of the plan and Dexter is left patching holes. And along the way, the emotional entanglement deepens. Lumen is the first person who sees the kill room and doesn't recoil from him. They share blood, then bedsheets, then fantasies of a life where their darkness is not a secret, but a shared language. Dexter starts to believe she might be the one person who can stand in full light with him and not be destroyed. Isn't this what he's always wanted? A partner who knows everything and still stays? But the central question is whether a bond built on shared killing can survive once the need to kill is gone. When the last man in the circle dies, Lumen's nightmares finally quiet. Her Dark Passenger, if we can even call it that, lifts, and with it, her reason to stay. The villains are dead, but the plan fails. The relationship cannot outlive the trauma that created it. She leaves, and Dexter is left alone with the realization that his Dark Passenger is not a foundation for love. It's a temporary bridge that collapses the second the other person heals. From here, the psychology only gets darker. If he cannot share the truth with a victim who understands him, what happens when the next person who sees his darkness is someone he truly loves? Someone like Deb. Season 6 answers that question by taking Dexter somewhere he's never gone before: church, not as camouflage, but as psychology. The Doomsday Killer case lets his Dark Passenger wear a halo, and that is where the trajectory really warps. We open on apocalyptic tableaus, bodies posed as scripture, plagues recreated in blood and entrails, a killer convinced he's enacting God's judgment. On the surface, Dexter treats Travis Marshall like any other target: identify, stalk, prepare the kill room. But underneath, something shifts. If Trinity proved that family could be a mask, Travis proves that faith can be a mask too, and Dexter is tempted to try it on. Let's kick things off with that temptation. Dexter starts asking questions he's avoided his whole life. Is he chosen? Cursed? Some instrument of cosmic balance? The central question stops being, how do I follow the code, and becomes, what if my dark passenger is part of a bigger plan? As he juggles fatherhood, blood work, and an increasingly erratic kill schedule, that fantasy of divine purpose gives him permission to push past even Harry's already broken rules. To keep this clear, watch how the logistics decay. Early Dexter is meticulous. Plastic everywhere. Clean dumps, no patterns. In this season, he chases a supposedly corrupt fruit vendor into a moving elevator, kills a man in a public greenhouse, and inserts himself into a full-blown end times investigation that his own sister is leading. Each righteous kill feels more symbolic, more staged, more for him than for any notion of justice. The Dark Passenger loves the theater, and Dexter starts to indulge it. At the same time, Deb is promoted to lieutenant. More authority, more pressure, less distance. The focus is not just on her career win, it's on how that new role drags her physically and emotionally closer to Dexter's secret life. She's running the Doomsday Task Force. She's at every crime scene he studies. She's reading the same signs he's secretly creating, only she reads them as evidence instead of scripture. This is where operational failure and relational collapse start to merge. Dexter's sloppiness isn't random. It's fueled by the belief that he's on some higher mission. The body count spikes. The religious symbolism intensifies. Fanatics, journalists, and law enforcement all converge on the same mythos Dexter is quietly feeding. He thinks he's hiding inside the story. In reality, he's making the story impossible to ignore. And then there's the church. Abandoned, echoing, lit by fractured stained glass, it becomes the perfect ritual space for Dexter to claim his holy victory over Travis. But it's also the inevitable endpoint of Deb's investigation path, the place every lead and every stress-induced therapy session is steering her toward. When those doors finally open, whose plan is going to survive? Dexter's, Deb's, or the Dark Passenger's? Because once Deb sees what's under that stained glass, Season 6 stops being about Doomsday and starts being about hers. So when those doors swing open, the fantasy dies in a single frozen frame. Deb in the doorway, Dexter on the plastic, Travis Marshall on the table, mid-ritual, the knife already buried in his chest. There's no clever cutaway, no convenient blackout. The Dark Passenger is caught mid-breath, and for the first time in the entire series, there is literally nowhere for Dexter's double life to run. Up to this point, Dexter's plan for Deb has been deceptively simple. Keep her close, keep her safe, keep her in the dark. Be the reliable brother at her side in every investigation, the quiet rock during her panic attacks, the one person she can trust when the rest of Miami Metro feels like quicksand. But never, under any circumstances, let those late-night stakeouts and those shrink sessions intersect with the kill room. To keep this clear, his whole strategy rests on a hard separation. Brother here, butcher there. The church shatters that separation because the Dark Passenger makes the call, not the code. Dexter doesn't have to kill Travis in that exact place, at that exact time. He could wait. He could move him. He could factor in Deb's obsessive need to tie off every loose end in this investigation. Instead, the compulsion to complete the tableau, to finish the narrative Travis started, overrides every survival instinct Harry ever tried to program. Control is sacrificed for completion. The central question in that moment is simple. Does Dexter prioritize avoiding Deb or satisfying the passenger? The answer is on the table, bleeding out. Watch Dexter's body language in that scene. He doesn't look surprised by Deb's presence, so much as interrupted. Like someone yanked him out of a trance halfway through a sentence. First, there's the stunned stillness. Then, the frantic rationalization. It's a one-off. Travis deserved it. Harry would understand. We can fix this. Each excuse is an emergency patch on a plan that has already failed at the most basic level. Deb has seen the truth, not the story. And then we hit the pattern interrupt. Deb doesn't run. She doesn't arrest him. She covers for him. That choice is the real kill. In a single decision, her moral framework bends around his dark passenger instead of rejecting it. The detective who built her identity on procedure, on belief in the system, starts lying to that system for Dexter's sake. From here on, every consequence in her trajectory, LaGuerta, Hannah, her own death, branches out of that one night in the church. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to this scene as the existential breaking point. After this, Dexter can't pretend to be three separate people anymore. Brother, cop, killer, the illusion of neat categories collapses, and each major section will show how Deb's knowledge turns every new plan into a slow-motion confession he can't take back. Season 7 is where that slow-motion confession turns into a full-blown criminal partnership. The church door is barely closed before the past claws its way back in. A single blood slide at a crime scene, LaGuerta's eyes locking onto it, and suddenly the Bay Harbor Butcher investigation we thought was buried in Season 2 rises from the grave with surgical focus. LaGuerta doesn't just suspect a copycat. She runs the trajectory backwards. Doak's body, the cabin explosion, the missing slides, the marina. She reopens every wound Dexter thought the ocean had swallowed. And unlike Doak's, she's not improvising off instinct. She's building a case. Files, timelines, surveillance, a methodical plan to prove that the butcher never died at all, that he's still walking around Miami Metro. To keep this clear, Dexter walks into this season with a three-part plan. Manage Deb's trauma, maintain the illusion of control at work, and, somehow, keep killing without breaking the code again. Then, Hannah McKay appears, almost like the Dark Passenger's answer to everything he's lost. A poisoner, a survivor, a woman who doesn't flinch at his truth. What starts as an investigation turns into a relationship he convinces himself he can balance alongside Deb's recovery and LaGuerta's growing suspicion. But the focus is not just on logistics, it's on psychology. The Dark Passenger isn't neutral here, it's intoxicated. It's drawn to Hannah's toxins, to the intimacy of sharing murder as romance. The more Dexter leans into that bond, the more he rationalizes cutting corners on the code, delaying hard choices about LaGuerta, pretending he can finesse an investigation that is explicitly designed to catch him. He keeps insisting he won't kill another innocent. The Dark Passenger keeps whispering that maybe LaGuerta won't be innocent for long. Meanwhile, Deb is dragged along behind every pivot. From the moment she burns the church records, her own plan, save Dexter, pull him back to the light, starts mutating. She hides evidence, lies on reports, lets Hannah walk when it benefits Dexter, then tries to reverse course by arresting Hannah when the threat feels too personal. Every time she chooses Dexter over procedure, her moral center erodes a little further. How do we even talk about a code when the person enforcing the law is now laundering his crimes? The central question becomes brutal. Whose will is actually driving these choices? Dexter's conscious promises, or the Dark Passenger using Deb's love as leverage? By the time LaGuerta corners them with warrants, GPS data, and that damning gas station footage, Deb isn't just complicit. She's standing on the threshold of something irreversible. All those threads not in one place. A shipping container on New Year's Eve. The Bay Harbor Butcher investigation. Hannah's influence, Deb's corruption, Dexter's fantasy of control. In this video, we're going to treat that container as the crucible, where every delayed consequence from Season 2 to Season 7 ignites at once, and where the Dark Passenger finally demands a sacrifice neither sibling can walk away from unchanged. And right in the middle of that slow-motion detonation, the Dark Passenger offers Dexter a new solution. Don't fight me. Marry me. Enter Hannah McKay. Yellow sundresses, rare orchids, and a body count buried under wildflower fields. To keep this clear, Hannah is not another Lumen or Miguel. She isn't a project. She isn't a rescue. She's the first person Dexter meets who already lives by her own lethal rhythm. She doesn't need a code imposed on her. She has one, even if it's looser, more self-serving, more opportunistic. Where Miguel wanted to be taught and Lumen needed to be guided, Hannah simply is. She kills when it's useful. She lies when it's convenient. She can poison a man with a smile and then go home and bake. The focus is not just on the fact that she kills, but on how naturally she folds homicide into daily life. For Dexter's psychology, that is intoxicating. So the plan shifts. Instead of building a normal family to contain the Dark Passenger, Dexter tries something far more radical. Build a life where the darkness is the shared foundation. No more hiding knives and blood slides. No more elaborate partitions between boyfriend, brother, father, and butcher. If he can love someone who already knows, already participates, maybe that finally resolves the tension between intimacy and secrecy. Maybe this time, honesty stabilizes the monster rather than exposing it. But listen to how quickly the Dark Passenger hijacks that fantasy. It isn't just that Hannah understands him, it's that she excites him. The danger itself becomes the glue. From the moment he spares her on the table, through their greenhouse trysts and whispered confessions, we watch Dexter ignore glaring red flags. A dead husband. A conveniently dispatched informant. A pattern of necessary poisonings that always, somehow, benefit Hannah. Is this love, or is it the Dark Passenger recognizing a kindred predator and overruling every alarm? Operationally, the relationship is a nightmare. Hannah poisons Deb, turning Dexter's one true ally into collateral damage for romance. There's an active investigation circling Hannah. From Sal Price's digging to Deb's relentless pursuit, each major section will of Season 7 shows another line Dexter swore he'd never cross for anyone, and then crosses for Hannah. He tampers with evidence. He sabotages Deb's case. He chooses Hannah's freedom over his sister's safety, over her career, over the already fraying bond that once anchored his version of morality. By the time Hannah escapes custody and vanishes into the wind, it can look like a rare win. She lives. She gets away. She'll even resurface later, still uncaged. But that survival is not Dexter's victory. It's the Dark Passenger's. The consequences are brutal. Deb feels betrayed on every level. The trust that survived Brian, survived Dokes, survived Trinity, finally collapses. Dexter's moral compass, already spinning, now points directly towards self-interest, dressed up as love. And that sets the trajectory for what happens in that shipping container, when another necessary choice will demand a far bloodier sacrifice. So when we finally reach that shipping container on New Year's Eve, it's not just another kill room. It's the crash site of every compromise that came before it. LaGuerta on the floor in her dress, hands zip-tied, blood on her head, Dexter standing over her with a gun, Deborah in the doorway, shaking, still in her dress blues. Badge, gun, brother, there is no version of this where everyone walks out. To keep this clear, Dexter's original plan was not to execute Maria LaGuerta. His instinct, even this late in the series, is still to preserve the illusion of the code. Frame Estrada. Plant evidence. discredit her investigation, make it look like the Bay Harbor butcher was a dead man, and LaGuerta got obsessed, went too far, and ruined her own career. She's an innocent colleague, a career cop doing exactly what Dexter himself claims to value, following the evidence. Killing her would break the one remaining rule Harry left him. But look at how we get here. Season after season of corner cutting, of small, dark passenger victories dressed up as tactical choices. He lets Leela clean up Dokes instead of facing exposure. He plays games with Trinity instead of pulling the trigger early. He drags Deb into his secret rather than taking the consequence alone. Each time, the plan is short-term control. Each time, the long-term consequences tighten the noose. By the time LaGuerta connects the blood slides, the marina, the gas records, Dexter has no clean exit left. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to this pattern. The Dark Passenger pushes for the immediate solution, and the bill comes due later with interest. Here, that bill is LaGuerta on a plastic tarp, calling him a murderer to his face. She begs Deb to arrest him. She tells Deb, out loud, what the audience has known for seasons. You're a good cop. You know what the right thing is. The central question lands like a gunshot. Who does Deborah Morgan choose to be? And then she chooses. Not the badge. Not the law. Not herself. She raises her gun, points it past Dexter, and shoots LaGuerta in the chest. It's a triage decision on the surface. Save Dexter. End the stalemate. Avoid him being exposed or killed. But psychologically, it's something much darker. Deb doesn't just cover up a murder, she commits one, for him, against a woman who represents everything she once believed in. This is the Dark Passenger claiming collateral. Deb's soul for Dexter's secret. Harry's code doesn't merely bend here, it dies. No victim vetting, no righteous target, no pretense of serving justice. Just survival. Just self-protection. Just two Morgans standing over a body they both know never belonged on that floor. From this point on, Dexter is not a good monster, pretending to channel his urges. He's a killer, whose last internal safeguard has been externalized, corrupted, and shot in the heart. And the trajectory from that shot will carry all three of them, Dexter, Deb, and the code itself, toward an even harsher reckoning in the endgame. Season 8 opens like a bad déjà vu. Another killer in Miami, another pattern on the table, another chance for Dexter to prove he can still run the double life. But the real threat isn't the brain surgeon. It's the woman standing over the blood, calmly telling Dexter she helped design the thing he worships. Dr. Evelyn Vogel doesn't just enter as a forensic psychiatrist. She walks in as the alleged architect of the code itself, with Harry's old tapes to back it up. From grainy recordings of a desperate father to clinical language about channeling urges, we watch Dexter's origin story reclassified. What he called a moral framework becomes a behavioral experiment. The focus is not just on a new antagonist, it's on the investigation into Dexter's own mythology. If Harry was following Vogel's blueprint, then the code is not sacred. It's a lab protocol that escaped containment. And Dexter's response is another plan. One last reinvention. Clean up the mess with Vogel, stabilize Deb, neutralize the brain surgeon, then disappear with Hannah and Harrison. New country, new names, same Dark Passenger, but this time under control. Or so he tells himself. In this video, we're going to treat that fantasy as his final and most delusional exit strategy. Because by season 8, every previous Dark Passenger victory has turned into a constraint. Deb's trauma from killing LaGuerta hangs over every interaction, a constant reminder that the line she crossed was for Dexter, not justice. LaGuerta's death itself lingers in files, suspicions, and quiet looks from Batista and Matthews. Even when no one can prove it, the room feels heavier when Dexter walks in. Miami is now a city full of ghosts. Brian, Dokes, Miguel, Trinity, Lumen, Rita, each one represents a moment where the passenger got what it wanted and left a new liability behind. To keep this clear, watch how his behavior shifts. Early Dexter stalks, confirms, prepares. Season 8, Dexter lunges. He kills the hitman in front of Deb's car in a fit of rage. He drags Zach Hamilton into his orbit on a whim, trying to replay the Miguel apprenticeship without admitting that version ended with a corpse on a rooftop. He keeps Hannah in Miami despite active warrants, despite Elway sniffing around, despite knowing this city eats his plans alive. The careful predator from Season 1 is now improvising, emotional, and sloppy. Here's the pattern interrupt. For the first time, Deb is the one trying to live by a code. She quits the force, drinks, crashes, claws her way back, and keeps circling a single question. Can any life near Dexter avoid collapse? The central question of her final arc isn't whether she'll forgive him, but whether she can survive him. And on the horizon, the hurricane waits. A literal storm, yes, but also the logical endpoint of this trajectory. A life built on failed exit strategies, escalating cover-ups, and a dark passenger that always cashes the check later. Each major section will bring us closer to that eye of the storm, where Deb, Dexter, and the last remnants of the code finally collide with consequences no plan can outrun. And waiting in that storm's eye is Dexter Morgan. From the rookie with a foul mouth and a hero complex to the woman pointing a gun at LaGuerta in that shipping container. Deb's entire trajectory is a slow-motion collapse. Early on, she's the idealistic cop, chasing her detective shield, worshipping Harry, begging for Dexter's approval. By Season 8, she's killed for him, buried bodies for him, and can't even recognize herself in the mirror. That's not just character development. That's the dark passenger, hollowing out its closest witness. To keep this clear, we have to track how Deb's psychology gets weaponized. The central question isn't just, when does Deb break? It's, how many times does Dexter's plan to protect her actually push her closer to the edge? When she kills LaGuerta, that's framed as a sudden, catastrophic choice. But the groundwork is years of Dexter asking her, implicitly and explicitly, to bend the rules for his secret life. She covers for his odd hours. She rationalizes his uncanny instincts. She lies during the Bay Harbor Butcher investigation, long before she knows the truth. Each compromise is small. Each compromise is survivable. Until it isn't. Season 8 is Dexter trying to turn that damage into a project. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to this pattern. He treats people as problems to be managed, not as human beings wrecked by his orbit. His plan is simple in his mind. Fix Deb, patch her up, get her back on the job. Then disappear with Hannah and Harrison as if the consequences can't follow him across a border. But every time he helps, he digs the hole deeper. He shoves Deb into therapy while still killing on the side. He drags her into Vogel's twisted investigation of his origin story, forcing Deb to sit in the same room as the woman who helped design the code that ruined both their lives. He even lets Deb believe, however briefly, that maybe the answer is to kill him and end it all. How do you recover from that? There's a brief, deceptive recovery. Deb returns to Miami Metro, pulls herself together, and we almost buy the illusion that the worst is over. The focus is not just on her competence, though. It's on how brittle that control feels. When Saxon enters the picture, Deb is pulled right back into Dexter's final conflict, not as a partner by choice, but as collateral in a war she never started. Her shooting is almost mundane in its staging. A hallway, a gun, a stray bullet. Yet thematically, It's the Dark Passenger's longest con, finally paying out. The sister, first endangered in Season 1, chained on that ice rink as Brian tried to remake Dexter's family, is now lying in a hospital bed, brain dead, because Dexter could never stop. Deb's coma is the relational endpoint of the code. No more arguments, no more forgiveness. Just a silent body Dexter unplugs and drops into the ocean, as if she's another victim on his table. Along the way, every promise to protect her has inverted into the ultimate harm. The Dark Passenger doesn't just win by killing strangers. It wins by erasing the one person who loved Dexter unconditionally, leaving him alone with the myth he chose over her. And from there, the storm has only one place left to go, inward. So when Dexter turns from Deb's empty hospital room and walks toward the dock, we're not just watching a brother in grief. We're watching the Dark Passenger choreograph one last ritual. Deb's body in his arms, the white sheet, the storm rolling in over the marina. Visually, it mirrors every kill we've seen before. Plastic swapped for cotton, a gurney swapped for the boat. Love and disposal fused into a single motion. He doesn't bury her. He doesn't fight for an investigation. He loads her onto the slice of life and steers toward the same ocean that swallowed his trophies. To keep this clear, Dexter is literally choosing to file Dexter Morgan in the same category as the men on his table. It's intimacy turned into evidence management. The passenger has finally taught him to experience human connection as waste that must be removed. Then comes the plan. Sail into the hurricane. Let the storm erase him, the way he's erased so many others. On the surface, it reads like a warped act of self-sacrifice, a last attempt at control. If he dies, Harrison is safe. Hannah is safe. Miami is safe. The code, his career, every failed safeguard, he's decided they can't contain what he is, so the only logical solution is annihilation. In this video, we're going to keep asking, when Dexter says he's taking responsibility, is he actually doing it? Or is the passenger just rebranding survival? Because the central question in this finale is simple. Is the hurricane a grave or a getaway car? The show answers brutally. The wrecked boat is found. The investigation closes. Everyone assumes Dexter is dead. But he isn't. The Dark Passenger has quietly reframed the plan. What began as atonement becomes escape. Instead of dying, Dexter abandons Harrison and Hannah to a life built on lies and trauma while he slips into self-imposed exile. He doesn't free them from his darkness. He relocates it, leaving a ghost-shaped hole where a father should have been. That's where the lumberjack ending matters. The flannel, the beard, the logging camp. On paper, it looks like a new identity. In practice, it's the absence of identity. No brother, no father, no boyfriend, no blood spatter analyst. Every role that once constrained the Dark Passenger, every relational tether that forced compromise or hesitation has been stripped away. What's left at that table in that bare cabin is a shell built to house one thing, the urge. This is not control. This is capitulation. The life Dexter constructed as a containment system, the code, the job, the family fantasy, has fully collapsed. The passenger has outlived Harry, outlived the code, outlived the entire Miami era, and it refuses to go down with the ship. Its only remaining objective is bleakly simple: keep existing, no matter the cost. But if exile is the passenger's victory, what happens when the past tracks that ghost down in the snow? In Iron Lake, that ghost puts on a name tag and goes to work. Dexter Morgan is dead. Jim Lindsay runs the hunting shop, jogs the same frozen loop every morning, and flirts, politely, carefully, with the local police chief. The snow is clean, the routine is rigid, and every part of his new identity is engineered as a containment field. No ocean, no blood lab, no late-night stakeouts, just repetition, distance, and a constant, low-level negotiation with himself. This is abstinence as a plan. No killing, no forensics, no intimacy deeper than small talk and shared donuts. He counts the days since his last kill the way other people count days in recovery, white-knuckling through triggers, and pretending the passenger is gone rather than merely sedated. To keep this clear, Iron Lake is not a fresh start. It's a controlled experiment in whether Dexter can survive without feeding the thing that has defined his entire psychology. And then Harrison walks off that bus. From the moment Dexter sees his son's face in the snow, the control he's built starts to fracture. The Dark Passenger doesn't just hunger for blood, it also hungers for narrative, for meaning, for a story where Dexter is more than a monster. Harrison represents all of that at once. A chance to be a father, to repair what he destroyed in Rita's house, to prove that the family fantasy wasn't a total lie. But inviting Harrison in means inviting history in. Every secret, every failure, every body in the ocean suddenly has a witness with his eyes. Here's the pattern interrupt. The first time we see Dexter truly lose it in New Blood, it isn't a methodical stalk. It's a relapse. Matt Caldwell, the entitled rich kid who shot up a boat full of people, pushes every Harry's Code button at once. Dexter's restraint snaps. One kill after a decade of silence. One knife in the snow. The central question is, what happens after he breaks the streak? The answer is brutally familiar. The old rituals come roaring back on instinct. Plastic, tools, posing the body. And immediately, the improvisational cover-ups begin. He lies to Angela. He manipulates the investigation. He drags Harrison into a web of half-truths about violence and justice that echoes Miguel, echoes Lumen, echoes every time he confused connection with complicity. In this video, we're going to treat that first New Blood kill as what it really is, not a heroic return to form. But the moment the entire Iron Lake identity collapses under the weight of the passenger's needs. Each major section will push this idea further, but New Blood is already framed as the final experiment. Can Dexter be a father and a killer without repeating the same catastrophic trajectory that ended Deb, Rita, and everyone else? Or is the very attempt proof that the Dark Passenger doesn't compromise? It only adapts. Because once the snow is stained, Iron Lake stops being a refuge and becomes what Miami always was, a crime scene waiting to be mapped. Once the snow is a crime scene, Harrison doesn't just walk into Dexter's new life. He walks into Dexter's origin story, replayed with a different child at the center. Blood on the floor of a bowling alley, a straight razor in Harrison's hand, the same numb, haunted stare we saw in those flashbacks of a toddler sitting in his mother's blood. The central question becomes unavoidable. Is this a rescue mission or a recruitment drive? To keep this clear, Harrison's trauma is not subtle. He remembers the Trinity bathtub. He's bounced through foster homes, abandonment, and that vague, gnawing sense that violence somehow explains him. When he lashes out at the school bully with that razor, when he leans into pain as connection, the psychology is unmistakable. Harrison is a mirror held up to Dexter's own origin, tempting Dexter to see him as both son and successor, the one person who might finally understand. Dexter's plan sounds noble in his head. No more lies, no more pretending to be normal. He will tell Harrison the truth about his Dark Passenger, about Harry, about the code. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to that gap between intention and outcome, and here it's brutal. Dexter frames this revelation as a gift. If Harry weaponized Dexter's urges, but at least tried to build guardrails, Dexter believes he can do it better. Updated code. Fewer secrets. Father and son facing the darkness together. But the passenger hears that plan and quietly edits it. Honesty becomes salesmanship. Confession becomes initiation. When Dexter leads Harrison into Kurt Caldwell's bunker, when he lays out plastic and explains the ritual step by step, killing together stops being a last resort and starts looking like a bonding activity. We watch him repeat Harry's mistakes with even less restraint. There's no therapist, no second opinion, just a killer using a moral language to induct his child into the family business. And Harrison notices the slippage. He's horrified when Dexter shrugs off Matt Caldwell's death as acceptable collateral. He's shaken when Dexter casually floats killing Logan, the one decent cop in Iron Lake, as a tactical move. That moment is the investigation in miniature. Dexter will kill for convenience, for escape, for control. The focus is not just on who dies, but on how quickly Dexter's justifications slide from he deserves it to he's in the way. Along the way, Harrison keeps asking the questions no one else ever sustained. What about the innocent people who get hurt? What about Rita? What about Deb? What about Logan bleeding out on a cell floor because Dexter wanted a clean exit? Those questions are the code finally being cross-examined instead of obeyed. So when Harrison raises the rifle in that final scene, it is not a twist of fate. It is the first time someone Dexter loves fully chooses to break the cycle instead of enabling it. Harry trained. Deb covered. Hannah ran. Harrison ends it. And that single act doesn't redeem the trajectory, but it does mark the only Dark Passenger victory that doesn't spread, because for once, the plan is to stop the killing, not to get away with it. So when we reach that clearing in Iron Lake, we're not just watching a father and son argue over a body. We're watching every Dark Passenger victory stacked in a single rifle sightline. Kurt Caldwell on the slab, Angela's investigation closing in, and Harrison finally seeing what Harry, Deb, and Hannah all refuse to look at directly. The full rotting ledger behind Dexter's calm explanations. To keep this clear, the confrontation turns on one specific fracture. Harrison realizes Dexter didn't just take down a monster, he killed Logan, an innocent man who was trying to help. No plastic-wrapped trophy, no careful adherence to the code, just a panicked escape plan that ended in a dead cop on the floor. In that instant, the fantasy collapses. The necessary evil becomes what it always was, a man who will kill anyone to keep his story intact. We see the psychology snap in real time. Harrison starts replaying the trajectory, Rita in a bathtub, Deb on a hospital table, now Logan in a cell. Every time Dexter promised control, consequences followed. Every time the code was supposed to protect the innocent, someone close to them died. The Dark Passenger hasn't been a burden Dexter carries, it's been a contagion he spreads. And even here, Dexter's instinct is not repentance, it's logistics. His final plan is painfully familiar. Run. New names, new town, new identity. Reset the board. Outrun the wreckage. In this video, we're going to keep pointing out how often that's his answer. He doesn't ask, "What have I done?" He asks, "Where can we go?" As if geography can fix psychology, as if the problem is Iron Lake, not the pattern. Harrison's refusal is the real break in the cycle. He will not be Miguel, seduced by the thrill. He will not be Lumen, disappearing once the immediate nightmare is over. He will not be Deb, throwing away her badge to protect him. Faced with the choice to become an accomplice or an executioner, he chooses something harsher and cleaner. He raises the gun. And Dexter, fatally, blesses it. He guides Harrison's aim, literally and morally, telling him this is the only way. Is that mercy? Or is that the Dark Passenger staging its own theatrical exit, making sure Dexter dies on his own terms rather than in a cell? dissected by Angela's files and federal indictments. The central question is whether this is the passenger finally losing or winning by choosing the ending itself. The focus is not just on the bullet, it's on the bill coming due. Every time the Dark Passenger won in earlier seasons, someone else paid. Dokes, LaGuerta, Rita, Deb, Logan. Harrison is the first person who refuses to keep covering the debt. He pays once, in blood, to stop paying forever. But if this is the only way the pattern can end, what does that say about everyone who thought the code could contain it? Harry thought he'd found a way to turn that bill into a budget, a system, a story Dexter could live inside without collapsing. That's what the code really is, not just a rule book, but a narrative that says, you're not the problem, you're the solution. Let's kick things off by stripping the romance out of it. From the plastic wrap to the blood slides to the meticulous investigation of each target, Harry builds a ritual that reframes an uncontrollable urge as a controlled plan. Stalk the target, confirm the victims, prepare the kill room, leave no evidence. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to this pattern because it's the scaffolding Dexter clings to whenever his psychology threatens to spin out. The code tells him he's a necessary evil, not a chaotic predator. But the Dark Passenger is not satisfied with being necessary. It wants more. It wants connection, validation, escalation. That's why Brian doesn't just tempt Dexter to kill, he tempts him to belong. Miguel doesn't just become a student, he becomes a friend, an admirer, a mirror. Leela doesn't just witness the darkness, she worships it. Hannah doesn't just survive his table, she becomes a partner and a fantasy exit strategy. To keep this clear, the focus is not just on bodies, it's on the emotional highs Dexter keeps chasing that Harry never accounted for. Here's the twist. Dexter starts weaponizing the code as a shield for those highs. When he lets Miguel kill, he tells himself it's about justice and control, even as Miguel drifts way outside the code. When he spares Lila after she kills Dokes for him, he calls it practicality, not gratitude. With Hannah, he insists she fits the code because her victims deserved it. When what really matters is that she understands him. Even LaGuerta's death gets folded into the narrative, eliminating a threat, protecting Deb, preserving the mission. The central question becomes, is he following the code, or is he recruiting it as an accomplice? Every time the Dark Passenger wins and Dexter survives, that question gets easier to ignore. Brian dies, and Dexter walks away thinking he can manage family secrets. Dokes dies, and Dexter learns that the universe will hand him scapegoats. Rita dies, and instead of quitting, he convinces himself that catching Trinity almost proves the code works. Deb kills LaGuerta, and Dexter reads that catastrophe as proof he can absorb any consequences as long as he adapts the plan. Pattern interrupt. What if the real failure isn't that the rules break, but that they succeed just enough? Each major section of Dexter's life ends with him alive, the passenger fed, the code reinterpreted. That survival loop feeds his overconfidence and his delusion of control. So, Harry's attempt doesn't fail because the code is miswritten. It fails because the need driving Dexter was never just about killing. It was about meaning, intimacy, and identity. The rules could channel the violence, but they could never contain the hunger for a life built around it. And that's the fault line the next part of Dexter's trajectory will crack wide open. That fault line doesn't stay theoretical for long. The moment we watch Dexter step outside the code, we start to see the same three fractures repeating like a pattern in blood spatter, overconfidence, hunger for connection, and a deep blindness to the intelligence of everyone around him. Every time the Dark Passenger wins, those three are in the room. Let's kick things off with overconfidence. because that's the mask Dexter wears most proudly. In Season 2, he treats Dokes as an annoyance, not a real threat. He assumes that military training and gut instinct can't compete with his meticulous plan, his forensics job, his ritual. Then we get the image that shatters that illusion. Blood slides glinting in Dokes' hands. The investigation into the Bay Harbor Butcher is literally built from Dexter's trophies. His arrogance didn't just miss a detail, it manufactured the case that almost ended him. The same trait metastasizes with Trinity. Dexter believes he can infiltrate Arthur Mitchell's life, learn his pattern, and kill him on schedule. Control the monster. Study the specimen. But he underestimates Trinity's paranoia and volatility, assumes the family man act is a stable fade, and keeps playing his own game while Trinity quietly clocks him. The central question here is simple. Who's actually hunting whom? By the time Rita is dead in that bathtub, we have our answer. Dexter's confidence in his timing and insight opened the door. To keep this clear, though, the focus is not just on tactical mistakes. It's on why he keeps putting himself in these positions. That's where the hunger for connection comes in. Brian in Season 1 doesn't just tempt Dexter with murder, he tempts him with being known. Miguel Prado offers brotherhood, Lumen offers purpose, Hannah offers romantic intimacy, Harrison offers a legacy. Each time, Dexter tells himself he can have both. The Dark Passenger and a real relationship, the Code and a normal life. But intimacy becomes leverage. Brian weaponizes their shared trauma against Deb. Miguel learns the Code only to corrupt it. Lumen's departure reopens the emptiness. Hannah's presence pulls Deb into moral freefall. Harrison, in New Blood, becomes the mirror Dexter cannot control. These aren't side stories. They're the Dark Passenger, expanding its reach by wrapping itself around the very connections Dexter craves. And underneath all of it is that third flaw. He keeps assuming everyone else will behave according to his script. He thinks Deb will break if she learns the truth. Instead, she breaks herself to protect him. He thinks Lagerta is chasing ghosts. She builds a precise, methodical case. He thinks Harrison is an innocent blank slate. Harrison is already mapping his father's psychology. Already asking the questions Dexter refuses to face. Each major section will show this same triad in motion: a confident plan, an emotional entanglement, and a misread opponent. Along the way, the Dark Passenger doesn't just push Dexter to kill. It pushes him to believe that his insight is superior, his needs are justified, and his loved ones are extensions of his design. These aren't random flaws. They're the engine driving the entire trajectory toward collapse. And in the next part, we'll track how early victories teach Dexter all the wrong lessons. Those victories fall apart fastest when we stop looking at motives and start looking at mechanics. The Dark Passenger doesn't just wreck Dexter's ethics, it wrecks his logistics. Nowhere is that more obvious than in the Bay Harbor Butcher investigation, the foundational operational failure that exposes the entire fantasy of control. Let's kick things off with that underwater graveyard. Bags bobbing up from the ocean floor, divers surfacing with hacked-apart bodies, and Dexter watching his perfect dumping ground turn into a mass crime scene. From a distance, this looks like bad luck. In reality, it's the bill coming due on years of sloppy confidence. Same boat, same currents, same disposal method. The very pattern Dexter trusted becomes a readable trajectory, and the investigation that follows weaponizes his own rituals against him. To keep this clear, the failure is not just that the bodies are found. It's that Dexter's entire operational system is built on the Dark Passenger's need for ritual satisfaction, not on genuine risk management. He keeps the blood slides. He dumps in the same area. He kills within reach of his day job. The central question isn't how did they catch on? It's how did this not collapse sooner? Once the task force forms, we watch improvisation start to replace planning. The cage with Dokes in that remote cabin is the purest example. Stalk the suspect. Lock him away. Wait for the problem to disappear. On paper, it's a containment strategy. In practice, it's a panicked hostage situation created because Dexter couldn't outmaneuver Dokes cleanly. The Dark Passenger wants Dokes neutralized now. The code would demand distance, patience, a safer target. The result is a man in a cage and a timeline Dexter cannot control. Then the cabin explodes. Leela's intervention saves Dexter, but only by turning his mistake into a massacre. A federal investigation, a dead cop, a blown-up crime scene. Dexter walks away, but the system around him is now primed to see patterns, conspiracies, loose ends. Each solution multiplies exposure. From there, the botched and nearly botched kills pile up. The rush setup with the photographer in season 1, the almost witnessed hallway kill, the parking lot improvisations where a syringe comes out because Dexter can't wait for a better opportunity. Every time he acts on impulse, a victim spotted in public, a sudden change of heart about a target, he abandons the slow. Methodical preparation that the code pretends to enforce. We're no longer watching a meticulous predator. We're watching a thrill seeker patch holes in real time. Each operational failure tightens the net. More manhunts. More internal reviews. More people like Dokes and Lagerta whose suspicions are sharpened by every unexplained explosion and missing suspect. And along the way, Dexter keeps telling himself he's adapting, evolving, staying ahead. Is he? Or is the Dark Passenger simply dragging him into bolder, riskier moves that require even more extreme cover-ups? In this video, we're going to track how that escalation works across his relationships next, because once the logistics start failing, the people closest to Dexter become both his shield and his most dangerous liabilities. Once the logistics start slipping, the Dark Passenger stops being a private hobby and starts feeding on Dexter's relationships. The focus is not just on who he kills, but on who he pulls into the blast radius. Every bond becomes both camouflage and collateral. Let's kick things off with Deb. Early on, Dexter's plan is simple. Be the protective big brother, the steady center in her chaotic life. We watch him coach her through cases, shield her from Brian's manipulation, stand beside her as the Bay Harbor Butcher investigation closes in. But the central question with Deb is this. What happens when the person you lean on discovers that your entire identity is a lie? When Deb walks into that church and sees Dexter killing Travis Marshall, her trajectory snaps. From that moment, her career, her morals, her sanity all bend around his Dark Passenger. She tampers with evidence, shoots LaGuerta to save him, and then drowns in guilt in season 8. Dexter thinks he's protecting her. In reality, his secret rewires her psychology until she can't tell right from wrong, only Dexter from everyone else. The bond doesn't break cleanly. It rots from the inside. Rita is the opposite experiment. She starts as cover. A quiet life, kids, a ready-made story of normalcy. Then something dangerous happens. Dexter actually falls in love. He wants the house, the backyard, the baby. But his obsession with Trinity exposes the lie in that plan. Instead of pulling back when he sees how Trinity operates, Dexter doubles down on the investigation, chasing control, chasing the perfect kill. Trinity walks right past his defenses and murders Rita in her own bathtub. Her death isn't random. It's the Dark Passenger's victory lap for every night Dexter chose the hunt over his family. Miguel, Lumen, Hannah, each is introduced as a way out or a way to share the burden. Miguel promises a partner, who understands the code, then twists it into a license for personal vengeance, forcing Dexter to kill him. Lumen offers catharsis, a vigilante partnership that ends the moment her trauma is resolved, she leaves, and Dexter is abandoned with the same urges and no excuse. Hannah seems like the final answer, a romantic equal who accepts the Dark Passenger. But their relationship ends in exile and separation, with Dexter faking his death and sending her away with Harrison. Each major section will show us the same pattern: hope, complicity, collapse, and then there's Harrison. Orphaned by Trinity because Dexter underestimated the consequences. Orphaned again when Dexter chooses self-exile in the storm. In New Blood, Harrison is offered the full truth and the chance to join the code. But what he really sees is a trail of bodies and broken lives. When he kills Dexter, it's framed as mercy, but it's also the final proof that the Dark Passenger devours its own legacy. To keep this clear, love in Dexter's world is never neutral. It is leverage, cover, and eventually a weapon turned back on him. Along the way, every connection that seems to anchor him only deepens the eventual collapse. But if the Dark Passenger feeds on relationships, what happens when there's no one left to lose? Except himself? In Season 1, Dexter introduces himself to us with terrifying clarity. I know exactly what I am. A monster with rules. A predator domesticated by a code and a lab coat. He believes he can stand in fluorescent light, joke with Masaka, date Rita, and still feed the Dark Passenger, as long as the ritual is neat and the ocean is deep. The plan is coexistence, not redemption. But even here, that identity is already cracking. Brian doesn't just threaten Dexter physically, he rewrites Dexter's origin story. Suddenly the Dark Passenger isn't an abstract urge Harry contained, it's a family inheritance, a blood bond. When Dexter kills Brian to save Deb, he tells himself it proves he's more brother than butcher. In reality, it's our first glimpse of the central question. Is he choosing humanity, or just choosing the cover that lets him keep killing? From there, each season forces a brutal update to his self-concept. Dokes' death in Season 2 is the first catastrophic victory for the Dark Passenger. Dexter's careful compartmentalization fails, the Bay Harbor Butcher investigation closes in, and Leela rescues him by blowing up the one man who saw him clearly. Dexter walks away alive, but the cost is enormous. The idea that he can be a monster with clean hands dies with Dokes. Let's kick things off in the middle of his life, where the roles pile up. Blood analyst. Boyfriend, husband, father, brother. Each new identity is supposed to dilute the darkness, to keep this clear barrier between the table and the dinner table. Instead, the Dark Passenger weaponizes every role. Miguel becomes a corrupted student, Lumen becomes a temporary vigilante partner, Rita becomes a shield he hides behind while stalking Trinity. And then, Rita dies. That bathtub image shatters Dexter's suburban fantasy more completely than any investigation ever could. His self-story as a protector, as a husband who can manage risk, collapses in a single frame. The focus is not just on his operational failure to catch Trinity in time, but on the psychological realization his need to hunt created the opening that killed her. LaGuardia's execution in Season 7 is another existential blow. She isn't a random threat, she's the embodiment of the system Dexter pretends to serve. When Deb pulls the trigger in that shipping container, Dexter's identity as a righteous killer implodes. He's no longer the man who follows Harry's code, he's the man whose code has dragged his sister into murder. By the time Deb breaks down, spiraling through guilt, addiction, and finally that hospital death, Dexter's last relational anchor is gone. Brother, mentor, savior, every version of himself tied to her is poisoned. What's left? Lumberjack Dexter is the answer no one wanted. A self-imposed exile, stripped of lab, family, and even the language of the code. New Blood doubles down. Iron Lake Dexter is an isolated recluse, pretending the killer is dead, clinging to Jim Lindsay as a flimsy disguise. But the Dark Passenger doesn't disappear. It waits. When Harrison arrives, we watch Dexter try one last time to resurrect a meaningful identity: father, guide, maybe even redeemed man. And that's the final existential failure. Not that he's caught, but that when everything falls apart, there's nothing left underneath the mask. Every role, every relationship, every story he told himself was just scaffolding around the only constant: killer. Along the way, the Dark Passenger didn't just win battles, it erased the man who thought he was in control. So where does a story go after identity itself has been hollowed out? The next step is brutal. We have to watch what happens when Dexter finally turns that destructive logic on his own existence. So when Dexter finally points that knife at himself, we hit the central question the entire series has been circling. Was he ever actually steering? Or did the Dark Passenger have its hands on the wheel from the start? On the surface, the early seasons look like proof of control. Perfect kill rooms. Witty narration. Stalk, confirm, execute, no evidence, no witnesses. Dexter at the lab by day, Bay Harbor Butcher by night. Compartmentalization so clean, it feels surgical. But when we rewind with everything we now know, those masterstrokes read less like mastery and more like the opening moves in a long, slow collapse. Every blood slide is a breadcrumb. Every ocean dump is a pattern. Every time he indulges the passenger and gets away with it, the psychology of an addict clicks a little deeper into place. To keep this clear, think about the big strategic decisions we usually credit to Dexter's genius. Framing Dokes, studying Trinity, recruiting Miguel. In this video, we're going to reframe those as impulses the Dark Passenger wanted anyway, dressed up in the language of logic and investigation. Dokes isn't neutralized because it's the optimal plan. He's sacrificed because Dexter cannot tolerate being seen. Trinity isn't observed like a scientist. He's chased like a high Dexter cannot stop sampling. Miguel isn't a rational ally. He's a fantasy of being understood, weaponized into another killer. On paper, Dexter tells us these are controlled moves. In practice, they look exactly like one last time. One last surveillance on Trinity that leaves Rita alone. One last lesson for Miguel that escalates him into a loose cannon. One last lie to Deb that drags her down with him. This is addiction logic. The focus is not just on the kill itself, but on the way every supposed exception becomes the new normal. Every boundary he swears he'll never cross dissolves the second the passenger whispers that it's necessary. Which brings us back to Harry's code. Was it ever real control, or just a story Dexter clung to so he could feel less monstrous while doing exactly what the passenger wanted? The code narrows targets, yes, but it also guarantees a steady supply. It gives structure, but it also gives permission. I have to do this sounds noble compared to I want to. And along the way, that moral costume lets him ignore the mounting consequences. Rita in the bathtub, Deb in the container, Harrison watching his father bleed. So, where does that leave us? Either Dexter is a tragic anti-hero fighting a losing battle against something he never chose, or he's a man who hid behind the Dark Passenger and the code to dodge responsibility for every life he wrecked. Is the passenger an invader or an alibi? In the next section, we'll press on that distinction by looking at the moments where Dexter could have stopped and didn't. So, if Dexter could have stopped and didn't, what does that do to the way we read the entire show? It means we stop tracking villains as the main threat and start tracking Dark Passenger victories as the real narrative engine. Every time the passenger wins, the story doesn't just take a turn, it drops to a lower level. Let's kick things off with the basic pattern. In Season 1, the ice truck killer isn't just a mystery. Brian is the passenger externalized, tempting Dexter to abandon the code. The big twist isn't Dexter outsmarting the investigation. It's Dexter killing his own brother to protect the lie of normalcy, sacrificing the only person who truly knows him. That's framed as a win. It's actually the first major collapse. Season 2 doubles down. The Bay Harbor Butcher case builds from Dexter's own blood-slides and ocean dumps. The rituals he believed guaranteed control. Dokes closing in on instinct, Leela burning away the evidence, Dexter letting an arsonist save him from exposure. On paper, the plan works. In practice, the passenger has just claimed Dokes, Leela, and any plausible claim that the code limits collateral damage. From there, each season's big twist aligns with a Dark Passenger win. Miguel turns Harry's rules into a political weapon, and Dexter responds not by stepping back, but by killing another would-be partner. Trinity exposes the fantasy of the safe family man, and Rita's death is the bill for every night Dexter chose the hunt over his own house. Deb walking into that church as Dexter kills Travis? That's not an interruption. That's the passenger dragging her into the game, permanently. To keep this clear, the focus is not just on plot turns, but on how the show stages Dexter's inner narrative against visual reality. We hear the confident voiceover, the perfect plan, the tight code, the controlled psychology. On screen, we see blood spatter on his baby's cheek, bodies washing up on shore, plastic-wrapped rooms expanding from hidden corners to garages to shipping containers to sacred spaces. The more he insists he's in control, the more the frame contradicts him. Those recurring motifs, blood, water, plastic, family dinners, start to read as markers of encroachment. Blood is never just evidence. It's lineage, shared trauma, the stain that keeps returning. Water is supposed to erase his crimes, yet the ocean gives up his bags, hurricanes frame his disappearances, and finally the storm becomes his chosen exile. Plastic starts as a barrier between Dexter and consequence, then turns into a visual cage he keeps rebuilding. And every family dinner, from Rita's kitchen to Deb's apartment to Iron Lake, becomes a countdown to the next person the passenger will claim. In this video, we're going to keep returning to the central question. Are we watching a mastermind execute plans, or a man slowly losing a rigged game he thinks he's winning? The series stays compelling because success is always provisional. Each apparent victory plants the seed of the next failure, the next investigation, the next body. And along the way, that lens explains why later seasons feel strained. As the Dark Passenger's wins pile up, LaGuerta, Deb, Hannah, Harrison's trauma, the illusion of control has to stretch further and further to remain believable. How many times can Dexter narrate order over visual chaos before the audience stops buying it? In the next section, we'll test that breaking point by tracing how those escalating wins finally snap the story in new blood. So when we hit that hurricane, we're not watching a bold escape. We're watching the last, desperate version of the same old plan. Dexter doesn't surrender to the state, or to any real investigation of what he's done. He surrenders to a storm. He stages his own death, rows into chaos, and then hides as a lumberjack in Oregon. It looks drastic. It feels final. But psychologically, it's just another kill room. He cages himself the way he used to cage his victims. New name, remote cabin, brutal routine. No connections. No witnesses. On the surface, it's punishment. In practice, it's a self-imposed prison built on the myth of control. If he can just isolate hard enough, work hard enough, disappear thoroughly enough, maybe the Dark Passenger will quiet down. The focus is not just on exile as sacrifice, but exile as yet another attempt to manage the urge without ever actually confronting it. To keep this clear, Dexter hasn't accepted guilt. He's rerouted it. There's no therapy, no confession, no accountability to anyone still alive. Just abstinence. White knuckle, lonely abstinence. And abstinence without healing is not transformation. It's a pause, a freeze frame. The central question isn't, can he stop killing? It's what happens the first time the passenger sees an opportunity again. New Blood answers that immediately. Iron Lake Dexter has rules, routines, a carefully controlled life. Then Matt Caldwell shows up, and the Dark Passenger doesn't need to argue. It just waits. One hunting accident, one arrogant lie, and Dexter snaps back into ritual almost effortlessly. Plastic, knife, fire, the decade of restraint evaporates in a single night. That's not recovery. That's remission ending. When Harrison appears, the trajectory accelerates. Dexter tries to graft a loving father identity onto an active killer lifestyle, replaying the family fantasy from Rita and Hannah with new stakes. He teaches Harrison the code language, reframes his own history as righteous, and imagines they can become a vigilante duo. But every time he leans into that fantasy, the body count in Iron Lake rises, and the lies multiply. He cannot be both. Loving father and functioning serial killer are mutually exclusive roles, and every season that pretends otherwise ends in tragedy, which is why his final moments with Harrison matter so much. In that clearing, bleeding in the snow, Dexter finally drops the code and the justifications. He admits Deb's death was his fault. He admits he destroys everyone near him. For the first time, he doesn't narrate control over the chaos. He names himself as the chaos. And he asks Harrison to pull the trigger anyway. His death isn't just the Dark Passenger losing. It's the collapse of the entire story Dexter built to live with himself. Harry's Code, the Bay Harbor Butcher legend, the Lumberjack exile, the Iron Lake vigilante plan, exposed as one long, self-serving lie. In this video, we're going to treat that collapse not as closure, but as evidence. Because once we see Dexter's ending this way, one more uncomfortable question opens up. What does that say about us, for ever believing the myth in the first place? So what do we actually do with that discomfort? We go back. We treat Dexter not as a nostalgic comfort rewatch, but as a controlled experiment in self-deception, run across 8 seasons and a coda. The same scenes we once read as proof of control become, on a second pass, evidence of a pattern we missed the first time. To keep this clear, start with the obvious inflection points. Revisit Brian's reveal in Season 1. Watch the way Dexter narrates his plan to keep Deb safe, even as he keeps her blind. Then track the gap between his stated control and the outcome. Deb duct taped to a table, Dexter forced to choose between the brother he always wanted and the sister he actually has. The Dark Passenger wins not because Brian outsmarts him, but because Dexter misreads his own capacity to manage both lives at once. Then move into the Bay Harbor Butcher investigation and Dokes' death. Put on those episodes and listen for every time Dexter says he has it handled. Every time he claims the code will protect him. Make a mental note. What happens in the next scene? Dokes finds the blood slides. Lundy tightens the net. Leela solves Dexter's problem by blowing Dokes up, turning a controlled containment plan into a moral collapse Dexter spends the rest of the series rationalizing. On rewatch, the focus is not just on Dexter's psychology, but on everyone around him. Pay attention to how intelligent and active the secondary characters actually are. LaGuerta connecting the BHB pattern years later. Trinity's family quietly adapting to survive him. Deb putting together the pieces long before she walks into that church. How many times does Dexter's narration tell us someone will never suspect, never act, never see, right before they do? Along the way, use a simple experiment. Every time Dexter says he's in control, pause, if you can, and predict the failure. What goes wrong next? Operationally, relationally, existentially? Does evidence surface? Does a relationship fracture? Does the story he tells himself about who he is crack just a little more? Once we start tracking those beats, the Dark Passenger's victory lap becomes impossible to ignore. If you really want to feel the trajectory, watch with someone who has never seen the show. Do not explain the thesis. Just observe. Their shock at Rita in the bathtub, their anger at LaGuerta's execution, their conflicted reaction when Deb pulls the trigger in that shipyard. In this video, we're going to keep asking whether those moments feel inevitable or avoidable, but in your living room, you can see the investigation happening in real time, in their face. This is not comfort TV. This is a case study in addiction, in the cost of living by a lie, in how a code becomes a cage. And once we've rewatched Dexter this way, we can finally turn to the last phase of his life and ask, what does it look like when the Dark Passenger no longer needs to hide at all? So let's kick things off by turning the investigation back on us for a second. We've been tracking Dexter's failures like a case file, but there's one piece of evidence only we can supply. The moment we stopped buying his story and started seeing the Dark Passenger as the one actually writing the plan. The central question: at what exact scene did Dexter's narration stop feeling reliable and start sounding like a cover-up? Was it Dokes pacing in that cage, eyes locked on Dexter through the bars, calling him a psychopath, while Dexter keeps insisting this is temporary, this is controlled? In that cramped, sweating space, whose voice felt stronger to you, the calm forensic expert, or the thing that needed Dokes neutralized at any cost? Maybe it was Rita in the bathtub, water gone red. Baby Harrison crying on the bathroom floor. Trinity walking away satisfied, while Dexter's whole family fantasy collapses in a single shot. Did that feel like Dexter miscalculating a target, or the Dark Passenger dragging his entire life into its orbit because he could not stop hunting, could not stop playing cat and mouse one more season? For some of us, it was LaGuerta on the dock, plastic rustling in the night. Dexter standing there with the knife, Deb with the gun, LaGuerta begging her to shoot him instead. To keep this clear, that is not the code operating. That is not justice. That is Dexter's addiction, cornering Deb into murder so his secret can survive. Did any of his justifications still hold up for you after that, or did the psychology of the show flip in an instant? Others point to Deb in the shipping container, forced to choose between her badge and her brother as he raises the knife over Travis. Or even later, Harrison in the snow in New Blood, staring down the man who taught him that killing could be a way to feel better. When Harrison pulls the trigger, did it feel like he was killing Dexter, or finally killing the Dark Passenger that had been driving both of them off a cliff? Drop your moment in the comments, and not just the scene. Tell us why. What changed about how you saw Dexter, or Deb, or the morality of the entire trajectory once that beat landed? Which Dark Passenger win feels the most unforgivable, and which feels the most tragic failure of a man who once believed a code could keep him human? Along the way, we're building towards something bigger. If you want, we can break down other characters' Dark Passengers next. Deb's loyalty, LaGuerta's obsession with the truth, even Harrison's need to break the cycle. And ask whose inner saboteur did the most damage when their plan finally collapsed. So let's kick things off by stepping back and looking at the whole battlefield. From Brian and Deb on that bloody table to Harrison walking away in the snow We've been watching the same pattern repeat. Every time Dexter thought he had a plan, the Dark Passenger quietly rewrote the ending. Brian is the first big victory. Dexter believes he can keep his past compartmentalized, keep Deb safe, keep the investigation under control. Instead, his brother hijacks the narrative, forces him to choose between his real family and his constructed life. The Dark Passenger wins by making Dexter kill the only person who truly accepts his darkness, and then lie to the person who loves him most. With Dokes and Leela, the pattern escalates. Dexter's carefully managed Bay Harbor butcher routine collapses the moment Dokes' instincts lock on. Leela solves the problem by killing Dokes and burning evidence, not because of the code, but because of obsession and desire. The passenger learns something crucial here. If the world corners Dexter, someone else will do the unthinkable for him. Miguel and the code? That's the Dark Passenger, treating Harry's rules like a suggestion. Dexter tries to franchise his system, to turn killing into a controlled mentorship. Miguel twists it into pure vengeance, exposing the code as fragile psychology rather than moral law. Trinity and Rita are the bill for that arrogance. Dexter stalks a serial killer like a puzzle to solve, convinced he can have the investigation, the thrill, and the family fantasy. He wins the hunt and loses his wife in a bathtub. Deb's discovery, LaGuerta's death, Deb's fall into addiction, these are not separate tragedies. They're a single trajectory. To keep this clear, think in those three failure categories we've been using. Operational, LaGuerta closing in on the Bay Harbor pattern until the only way out is a gun in a shipping container. Relational, Deb walking into the church, seeing Travis on the table, and choosing Dexter over the law. Existential, Harrison in Iron Lake, realizing his father's entire identity is a lie and deciding the cycle has to end. In this video, we're going to great lengths to show that Dexter's life is not defined by his control, but by the repeated collapse of his plans under the weight of his own darkness. The focus is not just on what he does to other people, but on what his own passenger keeps doing to him. Seen through this lens, Dexter stops being a cool mastermind and becomes a tragic figure locked in a rigged battle he keeps pretending he can win. And that's where the discomfort lives. Why do we stay invested in a man whose worst enemy is himself, whose every attempt at control plants the seed of the next disaster? Along the way, we've been circling one last question. If the game was unwinnable from the start, what does it mean that we still rooted for him? In the final section, we're going to turn that back on us. So let's kick things off by turning the investigation around. We've walked through Dexter's trajectory, mapped every collapse, and watched the Dark Passenger win again and again. Now we need to know how you've been reading those same scenes this whole time. In the comments, drop your personal Dark Passenger moment. Not just a favorite twist, but the exact beat where you realized Dexter was not in control the way he claimed. Was it Dokes staring at the blood slides? Rita in the bathtub? Deb in that shipping container? To keep this clear, name the scene, name the plan Dexter thought he had, and then tell us what actually took over. The code, the urge, or the lie. And then push it one step further. When you look at the full series, do you see Dexter more as an addict chasing a high, an excuse maker hiding behind Harry's code, or a tragic anti-hero crushed by something he never chose? The central question isn't just what he does, but how we explain it. So plant your flag. Addict, excuse maker, or tragic anti-hero, and tell us why that label fits the psychology you see on screen. Along the way, we want you to vote with your evidence. Which season best showcases the Dark Passenger winning outright? Is it season 2, where survival means sacrificing Dokes and letting Lila rewrite the narrative? Season 4, where Trinity walks straight through Dexter's suburban fantasy and leaves Rita dead as payment, or New Blood, where every attempt to restart only accelerates the final collapse in Iron Lake. Call your season, and then tell us which character or show should get this treatment next. Walter White's empire building, Bojack's self-sabotage, another vigilante with a code that keeps breaking. If you know someone who still insists Dexter was basically in control, send this video to them. Frame it as a challenge. Rewatch one season and track every time Dexter's plan quietly fails before the big disaster hits. See how fast that debate gets heated when they realize how many bodies, careers, and relationships are buried under I had no choice. In this video, we're going to keep building these season-spanning breakdowns, reframing familiar stories through hidden patterns and psychological pressure points. So if you want more long-form investigations like this, where the focus is not just on what characters do, but on the consequences that echo across entire arcs, subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss the next case file. Because here's the ominous part. The next time a character looks straight at us and says they're in control, that they have a plan, that everything is handled, watch what happens right after. In the final section, we're going to ask why we keep believing them anyway and what that says about us. So let's kick things off in the quietest, coldest place Dexter's story ever takes us. Not Iron Lake, not the lumberyard, but that bathroom floor in Miami. Baby Harrison, motionless, sitting in Rita's blood. A tiny body in a red ocean. That's the first time we really see the Dark Passenger win a war Dexter doesn't even know he's fighting yet. His plan to build a safe family perimeter, gone in one cut to black. Then we jump forward. Snow instead of tile. Blue sirens instead of yellow tape. Harrison, no longer a baby, standing over Dexter in the clearing. Gun shaking. Breath fogging. The same boy who once sat in his mother's blood, now framed against a field of white, about to spill his father's. In that single image, the whole trajectory collapses into a circle. The investigation is over. The passenger has come home. The central question the finale never answers for us is the one we have to sit with. Did Harrison kill Dexter to stop the Dark Passenger, or to keep from awakening his own? Is that bullet an act of mercy, an act of justice, or an act of self-defense against a future he's terrified to see? Dexter insists it's the right thing. Harrison says he doesn't want to feel the way Dexter does. But the focus is not just on what they say. It's on the fact that killing Dexter is exactly the kind of irreversible choice Dexter spent a lifetime rationalizing. Because along the way, we've watched how that inner voice works. It doesn't show up in a cape. It shows up as a nudge, a justification, a story about control. With Brian, with Dokes, with Lagerda, every time Dexter crossed the line he swore he'd never cross, the passenger was there first, whispering that he had no other option and that the consequences would be manageable. They never were. And this is where the show quietly turns the camera on us. Most of us don't have a homicidal passenger, but we do have a voice that pushes us toward the plan we want instead of the plan we need, then helps us rewrite the narrative when it all ends in failure. One more drink, one more lie, one more late-night decision we'll explain in the morning. To keep this clear, the psychology on display is exaggerated, but the mechanism is familiar. So here's the challenge. The next time your schedule blows up, your relationship cracks, or your carefully constructed life script suddenly veers off course, pause the inner narration. Ask, very specifically, which part of me really made that call? The part that wanted control, or the part that wanted escape? As we fade out, picture Dexter's empty chair at the table. Plate set, coffee cooling. chair pulled back as if he just stepped away for a second. In that silence, imagine the dark passenger sitting down instead, patient, unbothered, waiting for whoever takes that seat next. In this video, we're going to leave the investigation there, but the next move, that one is entirely yours.